The story begins at a blind date, where a man sits across from Miss Wildenbesten and asks if this is her first time, while she inwardly reflects on how cliché and repetitive this scene is. He then smiles and replies that it's his first time too, and begins to talk about himself, explaining that he loves to learn and gather information, and that back in the academy, while his friend were out having fun, he diligently attended classes and maintained excellent grades. She listens to him with visible boredom on her face, thinking to herself how utterly dull the conversation is, as he tells her that he isn't so slow that he needs to study all day, but that he works hard to improve his grades even in subjects he's already good at. He adds that he was so exceptional that he was eligible for awards in many subjects, which makes Miss Wildenbesten wonder why her mother, who married for love, would say that an ordinary man was the best fit for her. Her thoughts are suddenly interrupted by his words, as he suggests that once they decide to get married, they must discuss the division of property and land. She is taken aback by his rude frankness, wondering inwardly how someone could be so direct. Composing herself, she asks if it isn't a bit too early to be discussing such matters, to which he laughs at her naivety and assures her that these things, especially matters concerning money, must be settled as early as possible. Just as he is stressing the importance of financial matters, a loud bang, like the sound of a door being kicked open, suddenly echoes, startling him and causing him to jump. The man anxiously wonders about the source of the noise, while she seems more intrigued than afraid by the event, thinking to herself that things had just gotten more interesting. Soon, the Emperor's personal knights appear, entering the hall with steady steps. Then His Majesty the Emperor himself follows, and she looks at him in utter shock and bewilderment. She wonders to herself why he is here as he walks past her table. The Emperor stops and calls out her full name, Ella Wildenbesten, and she looks up at him in surprise, responding with a faint, questioning sound. The Emperor looks at her with a confident smile and asks what his fiancée is doing here. His words leave her stunned. The word fiancé, coupled with the possessive pronoun he used, echoing in her mind. She feels dizzy, as if the world is spinning, and wonders if this is a dream and what on earth is happening. As her consciousness begins to fade, she falls from her chair, and her memory drifts back to a night 3 years ago. That was the night she had declared the end of her unrequited love for him, turning away and saying that she was tired and that she would disappear from his sight. As he wished, she confirmed to him that she had ended her one-sided love. She remembers crying as she assured him that she would never appear before him again. She had even pleaded with him to find someone wonderful and live happily ever after. But in the end, he had simply stood there, without once looking back at her. Not even once. That memory ends with her crying miserably, calling herself a fool. After that night, she cut herself off from the world for 3 whole years, and the events shift to the day of the Emperor's coronation, a few days before he crashed her blind date. Ella is talking with another lady, wondering why His Majesty chose this day of all days for his coronation, to which Ella replies that of all days, he chose her birthday. Her friend, Miss Renee de Leon, comments that she doesn't know how she could have fallen for such an insensitive man. Ella replies that she herself would like to know the answer to that question. Miss Renee notices a beautiful bracelet on Ella's wrist and compliments it, and Ella tells her that it was a birthday present from her brother, Elvin, that morning. She adds that the gift wasn't just the bracelet, but also came with a wilderness survival first aid kit, which confuses her friend. Renee asks if her brother is always one for jokes, to which Ella replies that the problem is he was being completely serious. As they are talking, an attendant announces the arrival of Miss Renee of the de Leon family and Miss Ella of the Wildenbesten family, welcoming them to the Imperial Palace. As the crowd floods in, Ella feels an urge not to enter, but she thinks that perhaps she could sneak a quick peek. The scene then flashes for a moment to her finding herself in the Imperial Grand Forest, and she notes that despite the 3 years that had passed, the atmosphere there hadn't changed at all. She recalls the memory of being lost in that forest, crying and calling out for her parents and brother. She suddenly heard a rustling in the woods, and an 8-year-old crown prince Robros appeared before her, asking who she was. She seemed frightened, so he asked if she was lost. He then smiled and offered his hand to comfort her, telling her to follow him. As they walked together, he told her that the Imperial Forest was not usually open to strangers, but seemed to like her. He asked her to keep what she saw that day a secret, and when she looked confused, He explained that all those who see that thing are silenced forever, but he would make an exception for her. He moved closer to her, pondering what he should do now that they shared a secret, and then he unexpectedly told her that she would have to become his bride. Ella snaps back to reality, pushing the unnecessary thoughts from her mind. She resolves that she will no longer be bound by painful memories, that she has pulled herself together and let everything go. She holds her hand up to the sunlight, admiring the beauty of her bracelet, which looks even more splendid in the light. She examines the red gemstone on it, realizing that it's not a ruby and wondering what it could be. A voice from nearby tells her that the stone is a rubellite. She turns to find Crown Prince Robros standing right in front of her, and he tells her that he expected they would meet, much to her surprise. Why would he be here on the day of his own coronation? Robros tells her that this gem, the rubellite, was a favorite of his mother's because it resembled the color of his eyes, and that it was also named after him. He compliments the bracelet, saying it suits her well, and she thanks him. Ella adds that the bracelet was a birthday gift from her brother, Elvin, and Robros repeats Elvin's name in surprise. Robros asks if she still remembers his secret, and she asks him which one he is referring to. He clarifies that it's the one she first discovered, and she nods, remembering. She realizes that this is why he's suddenly being so familiar with her. She tells him that looking at him now, her heart doesn't race, and she feels absolutely nothing. He seems shocked, so she adds that after giving up on him 3 years ago, she has managed to forget him completely, but she explains that letting go of her feelings doesn't mean she would reveal someone else's secret. She assures him that she will keep his secret. Robros tries to say something, calling her name, but another voice interrupts them, asking where she is. Her brother, Elvin, appears, telling her that they were looking for her and that the coronation ceremony is about to begin. Elvin asks His Highness the Crown Prince to go on ahead, making it clear that he will escort Ella. Ella stands between them, feeling confused and anxious about the tense situation. Robros asks for Ella's permission, hoping she would give him a moment, as he has a private matter to discuss with the captain of the Knights alone. Ella agrees to his request and announces that she will take her leave and let them be alone. After Ella leaves, Robros turns to Elvin and asks if he has anything to say to him. Elvin first apologizes, and then Robros, in a friendly tone, asks him why he passed off the gift he had sent to Ella as his own, as if it were his own gift. Elvin explains that it has been 8 years since Ella's unrequited love for him began, and it took another 3 years for her to move on and forget, meaning she suffered for a total of 11 years and has only recently started to smile again. Elvin pleads with Robros, hoping he would take this into consideration. Suddenly, Robros drops to one knee, and Elvin panics, begging him to get up immediately for fear of someone seeing them. But Robros confesses that everything that happened was his fault. He declares that he is willing to do anything to win her heart back, and pleads with Elvin to understand his feelings. Elvin stands there, deeply moved by the sight before him and bewildered by the Crown Prince's persistence, letting out a sigh. The event flashes back to the day of the coronation, where the Master of Ceremonies announces the arrival of His Highness the Crown Prince and asks everyone present to welcome him with the utmost solemnity and respect. Robros appears majestically, dressed in his formal attire. Ella, standing in the crowd, thinks for a moment that he looks brilliant, but she quickly notices that his knee is dirty, which makes her wonder if something had happened to him. She flinches when Robros turns in her direction, and for a fleeting moment, she thinks their eyes have met. But she quickly dismisses the thought, convinced that it couldn't have happened, as he was the same man who had never once looked back at her even when she confessed her feelings. And so, a sarcastic smile appears on her face. Her friend Renee approaches her, remarking that it's been a long time since she last smiled. Her friend expresses how happy she is to see her smile again, and Ella is touched by her sincere words. Later that evening, Ella sits alone, holding the first aid kit her brother had given her, and when she opens it, she finds a letter from him telling her that her smile is the most beautiful thing in the world. Ella smiles, acknowledging to herself that her brother and friend were right and that it feels truly wonderful to smile. She makes up her mind to throw away everything related to His Highness, and she closes a box containing memories related to him with a sigh of relief. The box is filled with numerous letters and diaries full of memories, and she wonders what to do with them. She quickly flips through the diaries. With a serious expression on her face, she then throws them back into the box, confirming to herself that this past must be completely erased. Her eyes fill with determination and persistence as she decides to erase everything and start anew. After making this decision, she goes to her mother and excitedly tells her that she's going to a blind date, and her mother is overjoyed at the news. Ella remembers that she had finally managed to forget Emperor Roboros, the one who had broken her innocent heart, but at the very moment she was taking a step towards a new beginning at the blind date, the culprit himself appeared and caused this huge commotion with his astonishing declaration. It was only natural for her to lose consciousness and faint from such a shock. She wakes up with a start, screaming in disbelief, unable to comprehend how she could possibly be his fiancée. When she regains consciousness, she finds herself in a luxurious bedroom and immediately realizes it is not her own. She breathes a sigh of relief, comforting herself that everything that happened must have been just a dream, as something like that couldn't possibly happen in reality. She gets out of bed, still laughing at the idea of being his fiancée, assuring herself it must have been a dream. But she freezes when she hears her mother outside speculating about the possible reasons for His Majesty crashing her blind date. Her mother expresses her concern for Ella and says she cannot understand His Majesty's motives at all. In that moment, Ella realizes with a shock that what happened was not a dream. The two ladies continue their conversation, with the other lady speculating that the Emperor might be trying to get revenge on Ella for her past obsession. But Ella's mother immediately stops her, warning her not to say such things. Ella hears the word revenge and is stunned, her mind filled with confusion and fear. The two ladies notice her standing there and call out to her, while she is still lost in the question of why the Emperor would want revenge on her. The ladies rush over to check on her condition, and she replies that she is fine. But inwardly, she thinks in anguish, wasn't it enough that he ignored her for 12 years, and now he wants revenge? She finds the situation utterly absurd and resolves to go and confront His Majesty. Her mother tries to stop her, reminding her of the need to follow official procedures, but Ella confidently walks on, telling her not to worry, which confuses her mother. The other lady tells her to let Ella be and reveals a surprising secret, that Ella knows all the secret passages in the Imperial Palace. When asked how she knows this, she replies that she learned them, or rather, heard about them. Meanwhile, Emperor Roboros awakens in his suite. He sits up in bed, thinking that despite the 3 years that have passed, she hasn't changed a bit. Suddenly, several assassins who have infiltrated his room appear, and he sarcastically asks them about someone named Uncle Tiel. The leader of the infiltrators then orders him to die quietly, and a fierce battle quickly breaks out in the room. Outside, a servant is lingering, wondering if His Majesty is awake yet. The Emperor appears unusually calm as he gives the servant permission to enter. Upon entering, the servant finds the Emperor standing quietly by the window, with the blood-stained bodies of the assassins lying on the floor. Just then, Marquis Rodin, the deputy imperial spokesman and head of media, rushes into the room screaming and calling out for His Majesty. The Marquis tells the Emperor that the newspapers are in an uproar and asks him why he led the knights to Miss Wildenbeston's blind date the day before. The Emperor replies that his question is ridiculous, and the reason is simply that he has become the Emperor. He then adds with a smile that now that he is the Emperor, the way he treats her will naturally change. The Marquis is stunned by his words and mutters in pity for the poor Duke's daughter, then asks the Emperor if he is serious. The Emperor answers him with a sharp and affirmative gaze, that of course he is serious. The Marquis shrinks back, intimidated by the intensity of the Emperor's gaze and his unwavering resolve. The Emperor asks about the whereabouts of his ministers, and Marquis Rodin informs him that they have been waiting in the conference room for some time. The Emperor decides to head there at once, and indeed, the Emperor meets with his ministers in the room, standing before them with some documents ready for discussion. Suddenly, the doors are thrown open, and Ella storms into the hall, shouting at His Majesty and demanding to know what on earth he thinks he's done. She marches towards him furiously, pointing at him and demanding that he explain exactly what he means, while the ministers around him look on in surprise and shock. The Emperor looks up from his documents, surprised by her appearance, and calls her name, which makes her freeze on the spot as she realizes the situation she's in. Ella realizes she has made a grave mistake. She remembers that the Emperor used to be alone at this time of day and had forgotten that 3 years had passed and things had changed due to the presence of the ministers. Among those present, her father, Duke Wildenbesten, is sitting with his hand on his forehead, a sigh expressing his despair and extreme embarrassment at his daughter's reckless behavior. The emperor skillfully handles the situation to save her, apologizing to the ministers and claiming that he had completely forgotten about a prior appointment with her, describing himself as rude. He then announces that the meeting will be rescheduled and orders all the ministers to leave, leaving only Miss Wildenbesten in the hall. After the meeting is adjourned and they are alone, Ella nervously thanks him for covering for her in the embarrassing situation, to which he kindly replies that it's nothing to be thankful for. She then apologizes again for barging in, confirming that she didn't know a meeting was in session. The emperor reassures her, telling her not to worry and that he was about to go looking for her anyway. She is surprised and wonders why he wanted to see her. The emperor confirms this and asks her to listen to him since she went to the trouble of coming, explaining that the matter is related to love. Ella is surprised by the word and blushes in embarrassment, but the moment is cut short as her brother, Elvin, suddenly intervenes, saying, "That's enough." Elvin looks at his majesty with a serious and firm expression, demanding that he stop what he is doing. The emperor is surprised by Elvin's intervention and calls his name, while Elvin speaks to Ella, ordering her to come to his side at once. Amidst the confused glances exchanged between the three of them, the emperor refuses this interference, blocking Ella from leaving, confirming he will not allow this interruption to continue, and orders her to remain. Ella found herself in an awkward position between her brother and the emperor, each pulling one of her arms in an obvious power struggle, their eyes filled with provocation and anger. In the midst of this tug-of-war, Ella pondered the word romance, and suddenly realized the emperor was referring to something related to the Imperial Gazette, not the romantic confession she had assumed. Elvin forcefully demanded the emperor let go of his sister, but the emperor flatly refused, claiming she was his. Ella's patience reached its limit, and she yanked her hands free from their grasp. She yelled at them, demanding they stop at once and release her from this tug-of-war. Then, turning to her brother with a fake smile, she justified the situation by claiming she was only there for work, which surprised both Elvin and the emperor. Ella continued to spin her story, explaining that His Majesty was consulting her about a romance novel. The emperor played along, feigning surprise and sarcastically asking if this was indeed the case. Ella went on to explain that the Imperial Gazette was closely tied to the imperial family's image, so the novel to be published in it was an extremely important matter entrusted to her. She pointed out that he had chosen the right expert, as no one takes romance more seriously than a 19-year-old girl. Ella seized the opportunity to scold her brother, accusing him of interrupting her important work. Elvin, feeling suspicious, questioned the emperor to verify if this was true. The emperor, feigning anger and arrogance, rudely demanded to know if Elvin was accusing him of lying and condemned him for his excessive audacity in his presence. Elvin fell for the trap, bowing and apologizing profusely for the misunderstanding, and requested to leave immediately. After Elvin left and closed the door, Ella stood beside the emperor, feeling nervous and anxious about her actual involvement with the Imperial Gazette's novel, while the emperor watched her with a hint of guilt. She thought to herself that he should have cleared up the misunderstanding before things got complicated. Ella smiled and confidently announced that she was ready, and the emperor seemed somewhat surprised by her reaction, his eyes widening in confusion. She quickly asked him to tell her about the nature of the story, while the emperor thought to himself that a small misunderstanding wouldn't hurt in this situation. The emperor began to tell his story, explaining that it was about a man and a woman who were separated. The man was surrounded by many enemies who targeted not only him, but also everything he held dear. He added that the man loved the woman very much, but he lived in constant anxiety that she would face danger because of him. Therefore, he decided to hide his feelings for her until he had enough power to protect her. Ella listened with interest and expressed her understanding. The emperor continued to explain that the woman, unaware of his intentions, relentlessly confessed her love for him despite being coldly rejected every time. Ella then commented on how sincere and persistent the woman was. A sad expression appeared on Ella's face, and she sorrowfully noted that the story seemed a bit tragic. Ella wondered if the man could have confessed his feelings to her in private to avoid such pain. The emperor replied that his enemies were watching him everywhere, ready to strike. Ella lowered her gaze in understanding, murmuring that she understood how difficult the situation was. The emperor continued his story, describing how the repeated rejections had deeply hurt the woman, eventually forcing her to leave him. He added that when the man gained overwhelming power, he immediately rushed to her side, but she told him she no longer loved him. As a result, the man made his decisive final choice. Ella excitedly anticipated what would happen next, so he told her that he decided from that day forward he would devote everything he had to her, to love her and win her heart. She eagerly and expectantly asked him what happened after that. The emperor smiled quietly and told her that was the end of the story. Ella was shocked and surprised by this, thinking in disapproval, did it really just end like that, without any other details? The emperor asked for her opinion, and she felt pressured and nervous, wondering how he could ask for her view on such an incomplete story. Ella held her head in confusion, reminding herself that she had to think carefully since this novel would be published in the Imperial Gazette and had to be perfect. Adopting a serious posture, Ella decided she must answer professionally, so she frankly told him that she thought the story was not suitable for commercial use. The emperor was surprised by her direct criticism and wanted to know the reason behind her opinion. Ella excitedly explained to him, gesturing with her hands, that the story lacked the thrilling elements needed to capture the hearts of the public and spark their interest. She corrected herself with a friendly smile, saying it was too early to judge the story, as it was impossible to evaluate a work after hearing only the beginning, since the curtain had just been raised. As she continued to speak, the emperor watched her intently with interest, and she emphasized that readers couldn't judge a work until it was fully complete. Ella noticed some documents on his desk and expressed her admiration, remarking that she didn't know he wrote romance novels during state council meetings. The emperor confirmed this to her. The emperor looked at her with a quiet, affectionate gaze and said that the show had only just begun. Ella smiled confidently and concluded that from now on, how events unfolded would depend on her, the expert. The scene changes, and the emperor is standing seriously, offering a sincere apology to Miss Wildenbesten. Ella was surprised, and he added that he should have apologized to her first. He approached her, apologizing for directly interfering with her blind date and for claiming to be her fiancée without her consent. Ella remembered that this was the main reason she had come to see him. The emperor admitted his actions were reckless and expressed deep regret for damaging her reputation. Ella's heart raced at his words, and she tried to hide her fluster with a fake smile, saying it was fine because it was just a blind date, while mentally telling herself not to get excited or confused by the situation. The emperor smiled and asked in a meaningful tone if that meeting had also been meaningless to her. Ella replied with a brilliant smile and complete confidence that it didn't matter, as she could arrange another blind date anytime. Her words struck the emperor like a thunderbolt, and his expression froze in shock. She continued coolly, saying that the capital was full of nobles, and if it didn't work out here, she could always return to her own territory and marry someone affiliated with their family. The emperor stammered in disbelief, asking what she was talking about, but she enthusiastically continued with new suggestions, adding that she might study abroad and build relationships with foreign nobles, and that the idea wasn't bad at all. Ella placed a hand on her chin, closed her eyes as if in thought, and mentioned that she had heard there were many handsome men abroad, then deliberately and casually asked what that country's name was. The emperor's blood boiled, his face turning pale with intense jealousy. He threateningly repeated her words about studying abroad, building relationships, and handsome men. Ella replied in a feigned, innocent tone, confirming that was exactly what she was thinking. The emperor bowed his head, silent and tense. Ella smiled and asked if he was all right, and he answered in a faint voice, not understanding why she would do such unnecessary things. Ella was surprised and asked him to repeat himself. He looked up, his face full of frustration, and loudly demanded to know why she was doing such unnecessary things. The emperor pounded his chest and, with a look of hope and anxiety, loudly demanded that if she truly wanted to get married, she should marry him. Ella's eyes widened in utter shock, unable to process what she had just heard. The emperor immediately clapped a hand over his mouth, belatedly realizing the gravity of his thoughtless words. Ella stood frozen, staring at him in astonishment, wondering if she had misheard. Ella looked at him, confused and hurt, repeating his words about engagement and marriage, wondering what his motive could possibly be for saying such a thing. The emperor answered her emotionally, the reason being that he was now the emperor. He looked at her with a deep gaze, calling her name, while she took a small step back, tears welling up in her eyes, her heart filled with mixed emotions. She looked at him with a firm gaze and decisively rejected his proposal, which left the emperor in shock. Her memory flashed back to the past, to a time when she had offered him a piece of cake, full of joy and excitement, but he had completely ignored her, looking away. She remembered how he had always treated her, as if she were invisible. She also remembered how the noble ladies would whisper and mock her behind her back, gloating and wondering why she continued to pursue him after his constant rejections, finding it shameful, yet being amazed by her persistence. She used to stand alone in the ballroom with her cake plate, surrounded by scornful, pitying looks and cruel whispers that she didn't know her place, making her the object of everyone's ridicule. Returning to the present, tears streamed from Ella's eyes as she told him painfully that after all the humiliation he had put her through in the past, he now came to her with such a request. She confirmed her absolute refusal and clarified that she no longer had any feelings for him. Ella turned her back to him, announced she would pretend she hadn't heard anything he said, and then bid him farewell and walked away. The emperor reached out his hand in desperation, trying to stop her. Ella closed the door behind her, leaving the emperor standing alone in the middle of the room, his face filled with disappointment and regret. Ella collapsed to the floor and wept, clutching her chest and reassuring herself that it was the right decision, vowing never to let anyone play with her feelings again. Suddenly, she heard a voice calling her name. She found a noble lady with a warm smile standing before her, inviting her to come closer and telling her she would see a familiar face. Ella recognized the lady as Empress Abinazahard, the current emperor's mother. Ella remembered that the empress had been kind to her in the past, and they had laughed together. She quickly turned, wiped her tears, and tried to compose herself. Ella greeted her respectfully. She walked toward her, curious about the familiar face she mentioned, only to be surprised to see a red-haired lady standing by the empress's side, and Ella called out her name, Randall. Randall Beatrice smiled, both surprised and delighted, and asked how Ella had been. Ella remembered that Randall was a close friend she had met at the villa where she had fled during her 3 years of self-imposed isolation. Ella excitedly grabbed Randall's hands, asking when she had arrived in the capital and why she hadn't told her. Randall replied that she had just arrived that day. The Empress then interjected. She clarified that she was the one who had summoned Randall and revealed her intention to host a grand ball soon, stating that she needed the help of some young noble ladies who would lead society in the future. The Empress added with her arms open happily that gathering together is how true connections are made, and she considered such gatherings the pinnacle of high society's prosperity. The Empress kindly took Ella's and her friend Randall's hands, looked at them, and asked if they were prepared to assist her in the coming days. The two girls excitedly agreed and assured Her Majesty the Empress that they would do their best. It was only later that Ella realized she had suddenly become a member of the Grand Ball's planning committee without any warning. On the first day of working for this committee, Ella went to the Imperial Palace, feeling somewhat annoyed and nervous about her new task. Upon arriving, she was surprised to see the Emperor in a hallway and thought of taking a detour to avoid him. But her attention was caught by something else that piqued her curiosity. Peeking from behind a wall, Ella saw her friend Randall standing alone and talking with the Emperor, and she wondered in confusion what they could be discussing at this time. She watched the scene quietly, with Randall smiling amiably while the Emperor listened. Ella then decided to turn and leave quietly, so as not to disturb them or reveal her presence. Later, Ella was having tea with a group of noble ladies, where Renee expressed surprise about the marriage of a girl named Maria before moving on to a more important topic, curiously discussing the rumor about the Empress summoning a young lady from the Beatrice family. Renee turned the conversation to Ella, asking if this young lady was the friend she met when she fled in the middle of the night and isolated herself in the southern provinces. Ella took a nervous sip of her tea, annoyed by the term fled. Renee continued, expressing her surprise at the matter and implying it was extremely strange. Ella asked her what was so strange about it. Renee explained that the Empress had never met the young lady before, yet she had specifically summoned her to the capital for her debut in high society. Renee then speculated in a low voice whether the Empress intended to introduce her to the Emperor. Ella replied with complete indifference and a lack of interest, confirming that the matter had nothing to do with her. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Viscountess Vantier and Miss Hilka. Vantier loudly mocked, wondering when high society had become so lax as to allow those who used to chase after the emperor to show their faces again. Hilka then joined in the mockery, expressing shock that someone who had fled in disgrace and disappeared would have the nerve to return. Ella watched them coldly, thinking they hadn't changed at all and were still as gossipy as ever. Ella greeted them with a fake smile, noting that it had been a long time. Vantier then contemptuously demanded to know why Ella was at the imperial palace today. Ella thought to herself how annoying they were, always looking down on her. She then replied softly that she was here for the same reason they were, to help with the preparations for the Empress's ball. The two women laughed sarcastically, with Vantier saying how foolish Ella was to take polite words seriously. Hilka then implied how embarrassed the Emperor would be if he knew she was involved. Ella smiled confidently and replied that she had just spoken with His Majesty a few days ago, and he was even sharing the details of an interesting romance novel with her. She then sarcastically asked if that was how the Emperor would treat someone who embarrassed him. This left the two women dumbfounded and in disbelief. Hilka lost her composure and yelled at Ella, insisting that everyone knew how much the Emperor detested her and that her lies wouldn't fool them. With a provocative smile, Ella challenged Hilka, suggesting she go and ask the Emperor herself for confirmation. Hilka became flustered and started to stammer badly. Ella approached her and sarcastically asked if she didn't have the confidence to do so. Hilka, furious, condemned Ella for daring to speak to her in such a way. Ella told her that the reason she had persisted in confessing her love to the Emperor in the past, despite his repeated rejections, was not because she was ignorant of her station or foolish. It was simply because she chose to be brave, to stand by her feelings, and to never give up. Ella looked at Hilka with a sharp gaze and demanded that she stop belittling the feelings of others, especially when she herself had never had the courage to say a single word to the person she loved. Hilka was stunned by this cruel truth, and her words stung. Meanwhile, Randall was walking cheerfully down the hallway with a light step, wondering if she could make new friends at this gathering. She optimistically pushed the door open and entered the room, hoping to get along with everyone. She greeted them with a brilliant smile upon entering, only to find herself in a tense atmosphere. The noble ladies turned toward her, and soon Vantier began to mock Ella's dress, calling it shabby and sarcastically saying it was a brave choice. Ella demanded that she respect basic etiquette, but Vantier told her that a woman must always be mindful of her appearance, and that she was extremely embarrassed for Ella. Ella, as a woman, felt extremely angry. She defended herself, shouting that a woman's worth is not determined by her appearance or clothing, and rebuked Vantier for her stale and old-fashioned ideas. Vantier continued to provoke her, claiming she said these things out of anxiety and wondering if she intended to attend the party in such a shabby state. Burning with anger, Ella questioned if wearing a new dress gave Vantier the right to insult others as she pleased. Faced with such rude words and actions, Randall confidently intervened, responding to the mockery of the two arrogant noble ladies. Randall confirmed that Ella would be wearing a gown designed by the finest designer in the entire Zahard Empire. She added that it wasn't just limited to the dress. She would be meticulously styled from head to toe by top experts to shine at the ball. This left Vantier and Hilka in complete shock and confusion. Vantier, disapproving and in disbelief, wondered if these words were true, mockingly questioning whether a young woman raised in the countryside had the capacity to understand the latest fashions that followed the capital's trends. These words infuriated Ella, who approached sharply, demanding to know what Randall was talking about. Randall smiled and explained that Ella herself didn't even know about it. However, Randall placed a hand on her chest and proudly revealed that His Majesty the Emperor was personally overseeing Ella's preparations and that she was the one who had received direct orders to carry this out. Randall continued, confirming that the Emperor was greatly looking forward to the event and intended to have Ella, whom he referred to as his partner, dressed in the most splendid and extravagant way. Ella froze in shock, inwardly confused about what was happening. Good heavens, Ella stood stunned, her mind swirling with confusing questions, thinking about everything Randall had just said. The words his partner echoed in her mind, and she felt extreme disapproval and incomprehension at this sudden situation. The scene shifts back to about an hour earlier in the Emperor's office, where he was sitting with Randall. He asked her with great interest about Ella's favorite color, and she replied that it was sky blue, to which he nodded in understanding. He then continued his questions, asking about her favorite gemstone. She answered that it was blue topaz, and a look of complete satisfaction appeared on his face. The Emperor continued his precise questioning, asking her about Ella's favorite designs. Randall impatiently replied that she didn't have any particular preferences. The Emperor was surprised by her brief answer, and Randall told him that she had answered all his questions so far, but she clarified that Ella was not the type to be very picky or complain about her tastes. Randall smiled and explained to His Majesty that for Ella, what truly mattered were not the details of the gift, but the person giving it. Her level of happiness would be directly proportional to her affection for that person and the place that person held in her heart. The Emperor recalled Ella's harsh words when she had strongly rejected him, telling him that she no longer had any feelings for him. The Emperor fell into deep thought, recalling the sensitive political position of her family, the Wilden-Beston family, which, with its extensive influence, was considered the only family capable of balancing the power of the imperial family. He remembered her father, Duke Wilden-Beston, who had been extremely close with the former emperor and his younger brother long ago. Tiel Zahard. The emperor recalled from his memory how Tiel Zahard had intensely craved the throne and the right of succession, and how he tried to threaten Robrose's position as the crown prince. However, Robrose's exceptional abilities made it impossible for Tiel to pose a real threat to him. He also remembered that after the former emperor abdicated, Tiel lost his status as a member of the imperial family, while her father, the Duke, adopted a completely neutral stance, favoring neither side. This ultimately led to Tiel leaving the imperial palace to live in seclusion under the name Kelton, which he has done to this day. Based on this, Renee realized the emperor's true motive for suddenly getting close to Ella at this particular time. She was completely convinced that he had become more greedy after ascending the throne and was trying to absorb the influence of the Wilden-Beston family to become, in name and in reality, the most powerful and influential person. Randall apologized to her two friends, excusing her ignorance of these political machinations by citing her long isolation in the countryside, while Ella admitted to herself that she had anticipated this kind of exploitation but had pretended to ignore it, unwilling to believe it. Ella asked them to drop the subject, while Renee thought with bitter irony how insignificant the past situation was, how she had been attached to him and pursued him with no response, and now he was approaching her for power. She strongly warned Ella not to be deceived by the emperor's tricks. Ella reassured her, confirming that she was well aware of this. Renee anxiously asked if she had the strength to endure and face it all. Ella turned to them resolutely, confirming that she had forgotten all her past pain and had been reborn as a stronger person, which drew admiration and amazement from her friends for her resilience. She firmly and persistently declared that her heart would never be swayed again, and that she was ready to move forward with confidence. Just then, the emperor appeared, holding a huge and enchanting bouquet of colorful flowers, and greeted her with a smile. Ella and her two friends were surprised by this sudden appearance. The emperor approached and explained that he had come specifically to tell her something important, lest the mountain of work occupy his time and prevent him from seeing her for a while. The emperor looked kindly into her eyes and directly asked if she would accept being his official partner at the opening party of the Grand Ball. Ella felt extremely confused and psychologically pressured. She silently blamed herself for not clearly stating her intentions and decisively rejecting him during their last meeting. She muttered in confusion, trying to find a polite way to evade the proposal. The emperor offered her the bouquet, stating that despite knowing her hesitation, he had decided to wait and come to her in person. Ella froze on the spot, unable to find the right words to respond. Ella looked at the flowers and at him, confused and nervous, thinking that his actions had put her in an awkward position and describing him as a selfish person who imposed his will on others. He called her name and asked for her answer, awaiting her final response. Ella mustered her courage and told the emperor that she did not wish to see him, pleading with him not to appear before her in this manner again. After she officially rejected his request, he remained standing there holding the bouquet, while she quickly walked away from him. Ella continued walking toward the forest, trying to convince herself that she had done the right thing and that she had managed to say what needed to be said calmly and without crying. But her eyes soon betrayed her and began to tear up. Amid her distress and sorrow, her foot suddenly tripped and she fell to the ground. As she lay on the ground in pain from the fall, she was completely unaware of what she was about to hear moments later. A man's voice reached her ears, talking about another person whom he described as a villain, claiming he possessed evil eyes and demonic power. The thought immediately flashed through Ella's mind that they were referring to Emperor Robros, the one with the red eyes, hiding in the bushes to eavesdrop. Ella discovered a conversation about a terrible conspiracy. One man assured another that 60 assassins disguised as noble guards were scheduled to enter the imperial palace. The word assassins stunned her. Shock seized her, and her fear deepened when she heard they would all be taken care of during the grand party without anyone noticing. One of the conspirators continued mockingly, saying that whether they had red eyes or not, they were ultimately just human and couldn't possibly fight against 60 people on their own. But another man, who seemed to be the leader of the conspiracy, rebuked him, calling him a fool and reminding him of the fate of those who had infiltrated the palace in the past and were discovered. He explained to him that these infiltrators were not imprisoned, nor were there any signs of escape, yet their bodies were never found, which made him wonder about their unknown fate. The leader replied with a cunning smile that no one knew their whereabouts, but one thing was certain: it wasn't a prison cell. Therefore, he emphasized that he must be killed and threatened his companion that if he did not obey, he would face a fate more terrifying than a prison cell. The other man yielded to him, indicating that he understood. Ella covered her mouth in terror, realizing the gravity of the situation. His Majesty Emperor Robros was in imminent danger. She immediately rushed to the imperial palace and begged a guard to let her see His Majesty, even for just a moment. But the guard sternly told her that the emperor had ordered that no one be allowed through. Ella tried to ask when she could see him, but the guard refused to give a specific date, only saying that he would take note of the purpose of her visit. Despair and anxiety seized her. She wandered in confusion, not knowing what to do or whom to tell this dangerous secret. She recalled the conspirators' words about the fate of those who were discovered and deduced that if some were discovered, it meant that others had not been. She came to the conviction that she had to tell him directly herself, because no one would believe her and she needed to find someone she trusted. She hurried to the entrance of the Empress's palace and told a servant that she had an urgent matter to report to the Empress and the Emperor. But the servant told her that the Empress had caught a cold and was currently in quarantine, accompanied by His Majesty the Emperor. Ella anxiously asked him how long this situation would last. The servant explained that as a precaution to prevent spreading the infection at the party, they would undergo quarantine treatment until they were fully recovered, and therefore she would not be able to see them for the time being. Ella realized that if things continued this way, the consequences would be dire. Ella found herself in a meeting of the party planning committee, where the other ladies were busy discussing the types of flowers to decorate the hall, such as lilies or freesias. But Ella's mind was completely elsewhere. She was certain she had recognized the voice of the conspiracy's leader. The man had to be Tiel. She was utterly shocked, as she had never imagined he still clung to his ambition of ascending the throne. She thought about the insanity of it all, that he would try to kill his own nephew to seize the crown, and wondered how she had never before realized what a terrifying person he was. As she was lost in thought, Viscountess Vantier and Miss Hilka were whispering to each other, saying that the rumors about the Emperor being interested in Ella were complete lies, as the entire capital knew of his intense hatred for her. Meanwhile, Ella was anxiously thinking about what she would do if she couldn't inform His Majesty of the truth soon. The two ladies noticed her preoccupation. One sarcastically asked if something was wrong with her, and the other mockingly added that she hoped Ella wasn't anxious because she couldn't order a dress. Not for the party. They continued their taunts, accusing her of making up obvious lies to cover her bruised pride and pointing out that with the party date approaching, they doubted she could order a dress from any salon in the capital. Then, one of them made her an insulting offer, saying that if she bowed her head and apologized, she could get her an unsold dress, or perhaps she would give her an old one she was planning to dispose of, assuring her it was much more luxurious than her current dress. Their sarcastic conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a servant, who knocked politely on the door and asked if the daughter of Duke Wildenbesten was present. The servant informed her that he had something to deliver on behalf of His Majesty the Emperor, and a look of astonishment appeared on Ella's face. He then revealed the entire hall filled with luxurious gowns and elaborately wrapped gift boxes, explaining that these were gifts and a letter from His Majesty. Ella sat amidst the numerous gifts, completely overwhelmed and unable to comprehend the situation before her. The two noble ladies watched this scene in shock and disbelief, wondering how such a thing could be possible. Hilka questioned the servant, doubting whether His Majesty had specifically sent all of this to her, and the servant confirmed that it was true. The two noble ladies whispered to each other, admitting that the rumors about her being the Emperor's partner were true, and were amazed that His Majesty had insisted she read the letter. With a slightly trembling hand, Ella took the letter, then stood up and opened it, reading the contents with a serious expression. She read the Emperor's words, in which he asked why, whenever he picked up a pen, he couldn't suppress his desire to see her. She screamed at herself, wishing he would actually come to see her, as she had something to tell him. But he continued in the letter, writing that he did not intend to see her unless she came to visit him, which provoked her resentment. She thought in annoyance what reason he could possibly have for choosing this one time to do as she said. The Emperor elaborated, reminding her that she had described him as selfish, but he denied this and asserted that although she thought she knew him well, there was still much she didn't know about him, including the feelings he had held for her for many years. He concluded the letter by saying that even if she didn't accept his feelings, there were some things he desperately wanted to convey to her. Therefore, he would be waiting for her in the central garden on the morning of the opening ceremony. Ella's eyes widened as she realized the significance of this timing, as the morning of the opening ceremony meant she could see him before the official festivities began. A great sense of happiness washed over her, and she jumped for joy because she had finally found the right opportunity to inform him of the conspiracy. She regained her composure and convinced herself that what she was about to do was merely her duty as a citizen of the Zahard Empire. She tried to confirm to herself that she had no personal feelings for His Majesty. Time passed, and the day of the opening ceremony arrived. Everything went smoothly, without any incidents. Ella, dressed in her new gown, looked radiant in the central garden. The Emperor appeared before her, looking dashing, and praised her beauty, saying she looked magnificent. His words sent her heart into a flutter, and she thought that up to this moment, things hadn't been so bad. If she could just tell him about the infiltrators, everything would be all right. She looked at him with tears in her eyes, pleading with him to listen to what she had to say, but she had never anticipated that things would escalate to this point. The event flashes back in her memory to a few moments earlier when the Emperor was standing in the garden. Ella arrived in her elegant white gown. He turned to her and smiled. He walked toward her and told her she looked beautiful tonight, and his compliment made her heart race. But she quickly reminded herself that this was not the time to be flustered. She turned to look around and asked him if there was anyone else nearby. He seemed surprised by her question, but confirmed to her that the place was empty. She then told him seriously that she had come because there was something extremely important she had to report to him, and since the matter was confidential and no one else could hear, she asked for his permission to whisper in his ear. But as she walked toward him to whisper, her foot suddenly twisted, and she lost her balance, about to fall. The Emperor quickly handled the situation, catching her and saving her from falling, and commented that she was as clumsy as ever. She thanked him, extremely bewildered. The Emperor smiled and asked if she would prefer to whisper, and Ella, extremely confused, replied that she agreed. But he unexpectedly pulled her into his arms. He then moved closer to her and whispered that he would walk slower, so she could speak freely. This excessive closeness made her feel extremely shy as he carried her while walking. After Ella finished speaking, he suddenly stopped. She asked if he felt panicked. The Emperor confirmed that he certainly did. Ella thought to herself how terrible this situation must be for him. Discovering that his own family was trying to kill him, he must be feeling an indescribable fear. But the Emperor's reaction was completely different from what she had expected. He asked her in a sharp, angry tone if she was trying to get herself killed by eavesdropping like that. She froze in shock, and he then scolded her, saying she should have run away immediately instead of staying, wondering why she didn't feel any fear. And so she yelled at him that she wasn't worried about herself, but about him. as there were assassins after him. The emperor cut her off sharply, insisting that it didn't matter, and that what truly mattered to him was her. She was stunned by his words. He tried to evade the topic, claiming it was just business as usual, and then suggested they go to a more private place. So Ella thought to herself if he was being shy, surprised to notice that his ears had turned red. The emperor told her to listen to him carefully and clarified to her that nothing in this palace escaped his eyes. It dawned on her, and she asked him in shock if he had known about it all along, to which he replied, of course. Ella was shocked and told him she had been extremely worried because she thought he was unaware of everything. He looked at her seriously and ordered her to listen, warning her that from now on, if she ever encountered any dangerous situation, she must run without looking back. She reluctantly agreed. As they continued on their way, she looked at him, puzzled, and asked where their destination was. He replied with a smile that they were going to the ballroom. Upon reaching the entrance, Ella caught a glimpse of some nobles, including her father and brother, and to her surprise and embarrassment, she asked him to put her down. But he replied that she had a sprained ankle and had to be more careful. She begged him to listen to her, and he confirmed that he was indeed listening but refused her request to be put down, joking that he was afraid he might not be able to. Among those present, her father and brother were watching the scene with great interest. Ella realized everyone was looking at them, so she covered her face with her hands in extreme shyness. The emperor carried her into the hall, announcing her arrival, and then gently set her down, telling her he was truly honored to have her company tonight. Ella then understood why he had carried her all the way. It was to put her in a situation where she could not refuse him in front of everyone. He held out his hand and invited her to come forward. She felt a bit frustrated with the situation, but she admitted to herself that entering the ballroom by His Majesty's side had been a dream of hers for years. Just then, the voice of the Master of Ceremonies rang out, announcing the entrance of Emperor Robros Zahard and his partner, Miss Ella Wildenbesten. Ella walked into the hall side by side with the Emperor, their hands gently clasped. Under the watchful eyes of all, in that moment, Ella felt an unparalleled happiness, as if this scene was a public declaration of their love to the world. The guests present cast looks of fascination and amazement. As soon as they reached the throne platform, they sat down together, the Emperor letting her remain seated beside him, while she wondered in her heart if her dream was finally coming true. The Emperor leaned towards her, gently kissed her hand, and whispered to her that he would be away for a moment and would return soon. Ella watched his back as he walked towards the podium, while the Master of Ceremonies announced to the guests that His Majesty would now give the opening address. Sitting alone, she listened to his words, gazing at his back, a mixture of nervous emotions building inside her, causing her to clench her hands tightly in anticipation. As soon as the Emperor finished his speech and declared the grand ball officially open, a wave of enthusiastic applause filled the hall. The Emperor turned to return to his seat, only to find to his surprise that the seat where he had left Ella was now empty. His Majesty stood before the empty seat, looking on in silence, with an expression of confusion and anxiety on his face. Meanwhile, Ella had left the hall to seek quiet, running to a secluded spot to be alone for a moment. But as soon as she arrived, she was surprised to find a stranger standing with his back to her, sighing deeply. She wondered who this man was and how he could be in a place she thought only she knew about. As Ella spied on him, his muttering reached her ears. He was expressing a desire to see a girl named Randall. Beatrice. Hearing her friend's name, Ella was deeply shocked, her eyes widening in confusion. This young man was Daniel Amida, belonging to the ducal Amida family, a member of the Southern Knights, who harbored an old, unspoken love for his childhood friend, Randall. Ella decided to emerge from her hiding place and greeted him with a smile. He jumped, startled by her sudden appearance. Daniel placed a hand on his chest in fear and asked her confusedly who she was. She introduced herself softly, saying she was Ella of House Wildenbesten. Ella, with a kind smile, told him that people usually don't pass through this place, and offered to show him the way if he was lost. In her mind, she thought she had to act friendly in front of him, because he seemed like a suspicious person. Daniel, calming down a bit, asked her why she was also in such a place. Ella stammered at first, then explained to him with a serene smile that she was accompanying His Majesty to the banquet, which had drawn the anger and resentment of the other ladies. She added with a sad expression that the thought of being bullied again gave her a headache, and that she was hiding here out of guilt and fear of involving her friends in her troubles. Daniel looked at her with sympathy, understanding in his heart that she was a victim of bullying. Ella continued, expressing her apologies because her two friends, Renee and Randall, were probably looking for her now, and she felt too ashamed to face them. Daniel immediately paid attention upon hearing Randall's name. Ella suggested that having a noble gentleman by her side might help her avoid those awkward situations, and in turn, offered to help him find the person he was looking for. Daniel looked at her with interest and asked her directly if she knew Randall. They began to walk together, and Daniel confessed to her that he was lost and frustrated, as it was his first time at the palace, thanking her for her help and remarking on how Randall had such a kind friend in her. Ella humbly replied that it was nothing worth thanking her for. Daniel claimed he was starting to get a sense of the palace layout and pointed in the wrong direction, thinking it was the way to the ballroom, but Ella corrected him with a smile, pointing in the opposite direction. Daniel laughed awkwardly at his mistake, and they continued walking quietly through the palace corridors. Daniel then broke the silence, wondering where Randall might be. Ella pointed out that since it was Randall's first time at a palace banquet, she must be excited, and suggested they look for her where it was crowded and lively. Elsewhere in the palace, Randall and Renee were strolling together. One wondered where Ella had disappeared to, while the other suggested looking for her in a secluded place, convinced they would find her there. The emperor in the banquet hall was surrounded by a group of nobles who welcomed him warmly after his long absence. Despite the welcome, he seemed distracted, his eyes scanning the area for Ella, hoping to catch another glimpse of her, wondering where she had vanished to. When his eyes finally fell on her from a distance, his face lit up, a smile spreading across his features. But his joy was short-lived, as his expression quickly turned to shock and gloom when he noticed she was happily conversing with another man instead of him. Meanwhile, Ella was telling Daniel that her friend didn't seem to be nearby and suggested they go outside to look for her. He agreed with the idea, as it was getting too crowded. Daniel offered to accompany her, extending his arm for her to hold on to ensure her safety. Ella accepted his help with a kind smile and thanked him. The emperor watched this entire scene from afar, and so he turned away, his face clouded with anger and coldness, announcing to the surrounding nobles that he wished to leave immediately. On the other side of the palace, Randall and Renee were strolling, and one of them felt hungry, so they suggested going to the garden first to eat the food prepared there. Meanwhile, Ella and Daniel were walking in the garden, conversing amidst the whispers of those around them. She was telling him a funny story about Randall, how she had once been stung by a bee, causing her cheek to swell up badly, but she didn't mind and just contentedly asked what they were eating, which Daniel found amazing. Ella then continued, laughing about how Randall had pulled her hair hard at that time. Daniel smiled as he listened to her, while the two noble women who had previously bullied Ella were watching them closely. The two noble women began to make malicious comments, accusing Ella of trying to seduce another man, as they believed she had been rejected by the emperor again. They continued their mockery, speculating that the emperor had only allowed her to enter with him on the condition that she never approach him for the rest of her life. Daniel noticed the harsh whispers and realized they were still harassing her. Daniel's face darkened at the situation, thinking bitterly about the cruelty of high society's bullying tactics. The two noble women approached them with a smirk, Vantier claiming she didn't know Ella was nearby. Then, the noblewoman deliberately and maliciously pretended her hand slipped, spilling the glass of wine she was holding directly onto Daniel's chest. Daniel quickly handled the situation, warning Ella to stay clear and avoid getting hurt. Vantier feigned extreme regret, claiming it was just an unintentional accident, while Ella rushed over in a panic to check on Daniel's condition. With great concern, Daniel glared at the two noble women with a sharp and intimidating gaze, pointing out in a tone laced with a subtle threat that the etiquette in the palace seemed to have regressed significantly. He sternly condemned whether the current era permitted insulting a lady belonging to an ancient ducal family in such a rude manner, which caused confusion and extreme tension for the two noble women. Forced to retreat quickly, the two noble women stammered an apology, wished them a good time, and fled from their presence. Ella turned to Daniel, scolding him for getting his clothes wet to protect her. He nobly replied that protecting a lady was a core duty of a knight. Ella reached out to touch the stain on his jacket, expressing her deep apologies and sadness for not having intervened to stop it from the beginning. Ella looked at him with eyes full of fear and guilt, while he seemed a bit confused by her closeness and concern. Daniel gently took her hand to stop her, clarifying with a slight smile that he would handle the cleaning himself to avoid embarrassing her. At the very moment their hands touched, the Emperor suddenly appeared, watching them. The Emperor's gaze fell upon their clasped hands in Ella's surprise scene, his eyes gleaming with a dark and intimidating light, reflecting overwhelming anger and deadly jealousy. Meanwhile, Randall and Renee happened to be passing by, Randall accidentally bumping into Renee, who was surprised by the Emperor's presence. Randall noticed Daniel and Ella together and expressed her surprise with a smile, not expecting they already knew each other, unaware that the Emperor was standing behind them like a grim shadow, foreboding danger. Both Daniel and Ella jumped in surprise upon hearing Randall's call, and were even more shocked when they realized the furious Emperor was standing right in front of them. Randall said to Daniel that she was surprised to see him with Ella, as she had just been wondering where he was. Daniel took the initiative to clarify the situation, pointing out that he had been lost in the palace, and Ella had kindly helped him find his way. Emperor Robros interrupted their conversation in a cold tone, drawing Daniel's attention to his wet clothes and suggesting in a commanding voice that someone be found to take him to a waiting room. Ella tried to intervene to smooth things over, offering to accompany him herself. But the Emperor stopped her with a sharp glance, announcing that he needed to speak with Miss Ella privately, thereby forcibly asserting his authority and removing Daniel from the scene. Just then, Renee wisely stepped forward and offered to take Lord Daniel to the waiting room. He thanked her and went with her. After Daniel left, accompanied by Renee and Randall, Ella was left alone to face the furious Emperor. Ella hesitantly asked if he had something to say, but he unexpectedly countered with a direct and sharp question, asking what her relationship was with that man. His question took her by surprise, and she stammered in confusion. The Emperor pressed her again in a tone filled with jealousy, demanding that she clarify what exactly her relationship was with Daniel Amida. Ella's mind flashed back to the details of her conversation with Daniel, when he was telling her a funny story about their friend Randall, a conversation that had also revealed to her the deep feelings he had harbored for Randall since that incident. She remembered him begging her to keep it a secret, fearing that rumors might harm Randall's reputation, and she had immediately promised him, for which he had expressed great gratitude for having such a kind friend as her in Randall's life. As she thought about Daniel's pure feelings for her friend, a gentle smile appeared on her face, and it was this very smile that made the Emperor wonder if he had seen a similar smile recently. But he abruptly stopped her from continuing, saying painfully that there was no need to explain, and added an admission that he had no right to ask such a question in the first place. Surprised by his change of stance, Ella asked him what he meant by that. He explained to her painfully that even at this moment, he had no right to keep her by his side or to stand in the way of her happiness, and that he would not cause her any more trouble. Then he turned and walked away, wishing her happiness and leaving her standing there alone. Ella watched his retreating back, sensing that there had been some misunderstanding. She wanted to call out to him, but held back, not knowing what to say. She eventually convinced herself that there was no reason to clarify a misunderstanding that she hadn't caused. From that day on, things started to get strange, as Ella was talking with her two friends about the ongoing banquet and how she had gained weight. Declaring it was impossible to stop eating the delicious food, she suddenly stopped as she caught sight of His Majesty. The Emperor glanced in their direction and then turned away without a greeting. This act left Ella confused, wondering the reason for his deliberate ignorance of her. The next day in the library, the same thing happened again. As she was discussing the upcoming tea party with her two friends and jokingly denying her decision to give up sweets, the Emperor passed her on the stairs, completely ignoring her presence. It was then that Ella became certain that he had started avoiding her. Ella stood there again, utterly confused and lost in thought. She remembered that she had explicitly rejected him and tried to convince herself that she no longer cared about him at all. But despite this decision, memories of their encounters and the situations that had brought them together kept flooding her mind. In the end, she found herself still wondering why she kept thinking about him. She thought irritably that if he was going to leave and turn away so easily, why had he made those gestures in the first place that might have misled her and given her false hope. As she was lost in thought, her friend interrupted her, asking what she had just said. Ella brushed it off, saying it was nothing, and urged her to hurry up. As they walked together, Ella came to the conclusion that, after all, His Majesty's feelings for her were not as strong as she had imagined. She described herself as a fool, once again lost in excitement and hope all by herself. After a while, as they were sitting together, Randall mentioned what she had heard about Count Ralph Lindemann of the North, who seemed to be pursuing Miss Hilka recently, and she hoped Renee could confirm if it was true, pointing out that the two of them were often seen together, which surprised Ella. Randall wondered why Renee was not at all surprised by the possibility of the cunning as a fox Hilka falling in love, to which Renee replied that while Hilka was unfriendly towards them, she had always been very popular among men. Ella sighed boredly at this, thinking that even Hilka had fallen in love. As their conversation fell into silence, Ella let out a deep sigh filled with heartbreak. Renee commented that it didn't mean they could just find anyone, alluding to her own high standards in choosing a partner. Randall, on the other hand, sadly admitted that due to her introverted nature, she had no one to date in the first place. Ella added with a hint of a sarcastic smile that no one would date her anyway after she was labeled a stalker for pursuing a man, an incident that had severely damaged her reputation. Thus, they came to the conclusion that each of them was unable to pursue love due to their respective circumstances. Suddenly, Ella broke the somber atmosphere, stood up, and announced she was hungry. Soon, a servant approached them, praising the delicious desserts being served in the garden, and specifically recommending the apple pie, to which Ella kindly thanked him. Ella then turned to her two friends excitedly and suggested they go right away, as she wanted to cheer up immediately, a sentiment Renee agreed with. While enjoying their time in the garden, Ella expressed how happy she was, describing the pie as the best she had ever had in her life. But she was soon annoyed by the strong sunlight, which, despite the fine weather, made it hard for her to open her eyes. Both of her friends said they were fine, at which point an unidentified lady approached and offered Ella her parasol, asking her to take it as she was about to head back. Ella thanked her gratefully, and the lady replied that it was nothing. Ella wondered to herself just who this kind lady was. She then opened the parasol and enjoyed the comfortable shade it provided. Suddenly, a piercing scream for help broke her peace. She stopped in confusion and caught a glimpse of a man in the distance, forcibly dragging a woman who was begging him to stop. Ella recognized the woman as Miss Hilka, who was screaming for help, and Ella froze on the spot, unsure of what to do. Confusion and anxiety seized her, and she did not know how to act in this predicament. The man approached Hilka, pinned her against a tree, and angrily berated her, saying he had told her to stop. He then asked her sharply if it was really that hard to get a single document, claiming everything he did was for their own good. Hilka, furious, retorted by asking if he took her for a fool and explained that taking that document meant losing her father's private army loan contract, which was tantamount to stealing 500 soldiers. Hilka screamed in Count Ralph's face, refusing to be equated with him and insisting that his pursuit of her had been one-sided. A cunning smile appeared on the man's face as he commented that he had wanted to resolve the matter peacefully. But he soon revealed his true intentions as he forcefully grabbed a few strands of her hair, pulled her towards him, and questioned if she still didn't understand the gravity of the situation. He then threatened to ruin her reputation, suggesting he could spread rumors that the daughter of the Hilka family indulged in a wanton nightlife, messing around with men without a care in the world. He continued his threat, saying he had the power to make the rumors seem true depending on the circumstances, and rudely asked if she wanted to test him now. Just as she pleaded in terror, a hand suddenly appeared and struck the attacker on the head with a parasol. It was Ella, who boldly ordered him to get his dirty hands off her. The man was surprised by the sudden intervention, while Hilka was in tears. Ella stood bravely in front of Hilka, using the parasol as a weapon for self-defense. The man asked in shock who she was. Soon, he recognized her and asked if she was the daughter of Duke Wildenbesten. Ella was surprised by his knowledge and asked him how he knew. He answered her with a malicious smile, claiming to be on close terms with the Duke, and then tried to rudely shoo her away, telling her to leave, as he would overlook it just this once. Ella briefly wondered if he really knew her father, but she firmly replied that it didn't matter to her whether he knew her father or not. She asserted that using violence against the weak was absolutely unacceptable. He scoffed at her words and challenged that they could see together whether it was acceptable or not. At that decisive moment, Emperor Robros suddenly appeared and landed a heavy punch on the man, sending him to the ground. The emperor looked at him with intense fury, questioning how he dared cause a disturbance within the imperial palace. As the man trembled in fear, the emperor swore to him that he would not have a good end. He then ordered the guards to take him away. The parasol slipped from Ella's hand as the emperor walked past her, calling her name. He scolded her with a mix of anger and anxiety, reminding her that he had warned her before to run immediately in dangerous situations, and he asked her why she hadn't done so. Ella was touched by his obvious concern. He told her in a trembling voice that he was terribly worried she would get hurt. But in a moment of weakness, Ella rushed towards him and embraced him tightly, confessing how scared she had been. The emperor was surprised at first, but soon pulled her closer affectionately. The emperor noticed Hilka's rapid heartbeat as she sat on the ground, trembling and in a state of shock. Ella approached Hilka and told her that what had just happened was indeed frightening. The emperor ordered the guards to transfer Miss Hilka to the infirmary immediately and told the guards that there must not be any blind spots within the imperial palace. He ordered them to review the current security situation and submit an urgent report, then watch them go. After they escorted Ella and Hilka inside, he remained standing there, his expression grim. Later, Ella visited Hilka in the infirmary, where Hilka asked her why she had saved her, stating that there was no reason for her to go to such lengths for her. Ella stood by her quietly and replied, "Does one need a reason to help someone?" Hilka suddenly sat up in bed and agreed with Ella's words. She then asked her frankly if she knew that she hated her. Ella replied bitterly that after all the accusations she had made against her, it was impossible not to have noticed. Hilka clarified that her hatred was not directed at Ella personally, but at her parents, and that it had started when she was a child. She revealed that her parents had always warned her to be wary of girls her age from higher social classes, how they had instilled fear and caution in her, and how they had stressed that Ella surpassed her in status and ordered her not to lose to her. She recalled a time in her childhood when Ella had approached her and invited her to ride horses together. But out of jealousy and envy for Ella's freedom, she had rudely replied that horse riding was an old-fashioned activity unbecoming of a noble lady. Despite feeling deeply disappointed in herself afterward, her parents had praised her and encouraged her to continue being harsh with Ella, which she did, continuing to hurt Ella even though she knew it was wrong. She confessed that by the time she realized her mistake, it was too late and she lacked the courage to apologize. Hilka sincerely apologized for everything she had done and wished she could go back in time to make different choices. Ella agreed with her, stating that it might be too late to make amends and that unfortunately they couldn't go back in time. But she added with an optimistic smile that the rest of their lives had not yet passed and the future was still ahead of them. She firmly believed that there was still plenty of time and that they could start from now. Moved by her words, Hilka shed tears and asked if she really meant it. Ella extended her hand with a warm smile, assuring her that of course she meant it, and suggested they turn over a new leaf starting today. Hilka tearfully took her hand, expressed her deep gratitude, and then hugged her tightly. Ella smiled and embraced her back in a moment of reconciliation and forgiveness. Meanwhile, Madame Vantier rushed in, calling Hilka's name to check on her. Surprised to find them together, the lady asked her what had happened. Ella smiled and replied, asking her to pretend she hadn't seen anything. Hilka thanked Ella for coming, and as she was about to leave, Hilka asked her to stay a little longer. Ella comforted her, telling her to stop crying so she could rest her body and promised to visit her again. Ella reassured her of the sincerity of her promise. After Ella left, an expression of anger appeared on Madame Vanier's face. As soon as Ella returned to her room, her friends immediately surrounded her with great anxiety, asking what had happened and where she had been, while her brother insisted that she lie down in bed at once. Ella tried to reassure them that she was fine, but Randall anxiously scolded her, saying she had called her name 3 times today alone and ordered her to rest. So they help her lie down in bed to rest. As she lay down, her brother told her he had heard she did something reckless in the garden to save Hilka. Randall sarcastically commented on her saving that vixen, while Daniel confirmed that His Majesty the Emperor had indeed appeared on the scene. Ella smiled and reassured them, insisting that she had reconciled with Hilka, who was in a difficult situation, and asked them to give her a new chance as she promised to become better. Renee pressed on, wanting to know what had happened with His Majesty the Emperor and if the rumors about them hugging in the garden were true. Ella, blushing beet red with shyness, buried her face in the covers. Her friends took this as confirmation of the rumor's truth and curiously pressed on, asking if they had really hugged. Ella's brother, Elvin, who had been watching silently, then called her name softly and told her seriously that there was something he needed to tell her. Ella asked him curiously if there was something she had to know and what its nature was. A look of hesitation appeared on Elvin's face, but he turned to another lady, who was Ella and Elvin's older sister. She sighed, seemingly worried about her younger sister. The sister suggested to Ella that it was time to reevaluate their father's political strategy. Ella was surprised by this sudden proposal. The sister asked Ella where they were now, which was the Imperial Palace, and what kind of events they were most often invited to. Ella answered that it was royal occasions. The sister then went on to ask with whom they often interacted, to which Ella replied it was Emperor Emeritus John. And at this, expressions of surprise appeared on the faces of Renee and Randall, who were listening to the conversation. The sister clarified that she wasn't asking obvious questions because she thought she was stupid, but to make her realize something she had been overlooking. Understanding her sister's hint, Ella concluded that she was trying to say that their father was on the side of the imperial family. But she couldn't figure out what that had to do with the way her father handled politics, pointing out that it was normal for nobles to maintain relations with the imperial palace. The sister posed one last question, asking her to recall how their father used to act whenever rumors were rampant. Ella was left in complete confusion, unable to grasp the meaning of the question. The sister smiled and told her through the door that she had given her more than enough hints. After she left, Ella came to the conclusion that her sister was betting on both sides to see who would ultimately win and wondered if she was just a neutral party awaiting the outcome. But her sister opened the door again, surprising everyone, and ordered Renee and Randall to leave as she wanted to speak with Ella privately. Desperate to avoid the conversation, Ella pretended to understand her intentions, saying she was talking about maintaining a wise and peaceful stance and not ignoring wrongdoing when conflicts arose. Her sister glanced at her two dumbfounded friends and then closed the door behind her. Ella breathed a sigh of relief, while Randall commented that the atmosphere had been extremely tense and asked if it was just her. Ella confirmed that it was indeed the case, and Renee wondered why her sister would intervene in such a situation. Ella replied that she was sick and resting and thought she would be granted leniency this time. They then asked about the personality of Miss Bianca, who was with her, to which Ella replied that there wasn't much to say. Ella recalled how her sister would always ask her what she would do when she fought with someone, such as her argument with her brother, which ended with her officially declaring to cut ties with him, and how her sister had come to visit her in her room afterward and defended Elvin's angry behavior, saying he was afraid she would hurt herself and that his yelling came from shock. She had assured her that Elvin was not good at expressing himself kindly and that Ella was much better at it, making her the mature one between them. She had advised her to tolerate him until he learned how to speak in a gentle tone and reminded her that he had cried because of her many times. As a result, her brother had always backed down, believing his sister deserved it for not heeding his warnings. But Ella could not believe that he had actually cried. Ella's sister had confirmed that Elvin was of course worried about her, and added with a smile that she believed Ella felt that worry too, pointing out that anyone would be shocked if their favorite sibling started yelling at them. Suddenly, Elvin asked in surprise and delight if Ella had really said he was her favorite brother. His sister confirmed it with a smile, surprised that he didn't know. The sister jokingly apologized for letting the secret slip and asked Elvin not to tell Ella what she had said, so she wouldn't be embarrassed. Elvin agreed with a shy smile. Ella recalled how her sister always intervened at just the right moment to prevent situations from becoming complicated and admitted she felt a little betrayed when she found out about it later. She sincerely acknowledged that her sister's ability to handle situations was impressive and wished she could learn that kind of cunning from her, pointing out that her sister always appeared neutral on the surface. But deep down, she knew exactly what was right and how to subtly guide matters to her family's benefit. Ella recalled a past scene where her family was talking with some members of the royal family, and they always made sure to confirm that there were no ties between them and the opposing Tilling family. She remembered her father talking harmoniously with a high-ranking noble in the palace, while she observed the situation from a distance. She thought about how her father had never openly declared that he was on the palace's side. Ella covered her mouth with her hand in shock as she suddenly realized the truth of Emperor Robrose's intentions. She thought to herself that his attempts to win her favor, and perhaps even his marriage proposal, were nothing more than a means to control her family. She concluded that he must think her father was not yet on his side, and by proposing to her, he could seize power. She looked at her two friends, fire burning in her eyes. Randall realized that the Emperor couldn't possibly know this truth, but Renee quieted her and said she had to go home at once. Renee bid Ella farewell, telling her she would leave with Randall and that she should get some rest. Later, she decided she had to tell His Majesty, thinking she must tell him that her father already supported him and that this marriage was not necessary, even if he didn't marry her. She stopped abruptly, wondering about the reason for her hesitation. Ella sat in her room in despair, thinking it would be better if she told him and cleared up the misunderstanding between them. She didn't know what was wrong with her, why she couldn't even muster the hatred she was supposed to feel, and instead felt so hesitant. Ella went for a walk in the garden to clear her thoughts, when suddenly the Emperor appeared behind her. She was startled to see him and asked why he was out so late. He replied that he was getting some fresh air and told her he had decided to personally take over the interrogation of the man who had threatened her and Miss Hilka. In a firm tone, he assured her that he intended to uncover every crime the man had committed and would punish him severely. Ella was surprised by his words and asked in astonishment if he had come all this way, just to tell her that. The Emperor smiled gently and confessed that he was actually very worried about her and had come to check on her. Ella smiled and assured him that she was perfectly fine. The Emperor suggested walking with her, explaining that he didn't want her to run into any more danger, and asked if she minded his company. Ella replied that she didn't. The two walked in silence through the forest. The Emperor commented on the beautiful, fresh breeze, and while Ella agreed with him, deep down, she was struggling with guilt, wondering if she had to tell him the truth now, afraid she would be crushed by the guilt if she continued to feign ignorance. Noticing her distraction and silence, the Emperor turned to her with concern, wondering to himself if his presence was annoying or making her uncomfortable. The Emperor smiled to himself, thinking he couldn't blame Ella for feeling that way. He then called Ella's name. She jumped, responding nervously, unsure what he wanted. His Majesty reassured her, telling her not to worry about what had just happened, referring to when it hugged her, explaining that anyone who was scared would have reacted that way. The Emperor smiled gently and confessed that he was glad he could protect her and that she felt safe in his arms, which made him feel an overwhelming desire not to let her go. Embarrassed and confused by his words, Ella sincerely admitted that she felt like a fool every time and was afraid she would start misunderstanding his intentions and get the wrong idea. She forced a smile and suggested it would be best if they stopped this kind of behavior. The Emperor's expression turned serious, and he asked her what she meant by that. Ella stopped walking, looked at him, and told him there was something important she had to tell him. Before she could finish her sentence, a sudden rustling sound broke the atmosphere. A throwing knife came speeding toward them, which the Emperor immediately noticed. The knife thudded into the trunk of a nearby tree as three masked assassins emerged from the shadows of the forest. The Emperor intervened with astonishing speed, shielding Ella with his body. His eyes glowed red as he sternly ordered her not to leave his side. The Emperor stood like an impenetrable shield between Ella and the three assassins, while she, overcome with shock, wondered what was happening. The Emperor ordered her to step back and then pushed her behind him, causing Ella to let out a terrified scream. The Emperor released a powerful darkness from his hands. The dark magic surged toward the assassins, and the immense magical force struck the masked figures, knocking them to the ground. After eliminating the threat, the Emperor stood victorious, panting slightly, before rushing anxiously to Ella to check on her, asking if she was all right. Utterly stunned, Ella stared at him, murmuring his name and asking what had just happened. The Emperor apologized for scaring Ella, explaining that he was born with a special magic, a fact classified as a state secret known only to a very few, adding that his red eyes were the most obvious proof of this power. Ella suddenly noticed something on his arm and gasped, pointing out that he was injured and bleeding badly. Ella quickly approached him, tore a strip of fabric from her dress, and told him she was going to give him first aid, pleading with him not to move. The Emperor calmly looked at his wound and tried to downplay it, saying it was just a minor injury. But Ella became very angry, her eyes glistening with tears. She shouted at him, refusing to let him dismiss his injury, stressing that the wound was bleeding heavily and was anything but minor. Ella bent down, focused on tying the strip of cloth tightly around the wound to stop the bleeding, while the Emperor watched her with a gaze full of tenderness and love. After tying the knot, Ella warned him that this was only first aid and that he must receive proper treatment later. Ella thought back to what had just happened, marveling that His Majesty had been hiding such incredible power all this time. She then looked up at him and, with a sincere smile, asserted that they had survived thanks to that power. He returned her gaze with admiration and gratitude. Ella studied his face in the moonlight, their eyes meeting in a quiet and profound moment. Ella shyly took a small step back, telling him it had been a long time since she had seen his eyes glow red, recalling that the last time was when they were 4 years old. The Emperor smiled gently, said her name, and then asked in a pleading tone if she was ready to give him another chance. Ella lowered her gaze, steeling herself, and replied that before they talked about that, there was something important she had to tell him. Ella raised her head to look him straight in the eye and revealed the truth she had realized earlier, clearly confirming to him that her father was on the side of the royal family and truly supported them. Ella confirmed that her father's supportive stance toward the royal family had never wavered, and that it might have been the case even before His Majesty was born. The Emperor seemed surprised for a moment, then nodded, acknowledging that what she said was true. The Emperor expressed his deep gratitude, admitting he was probably late in saying so, and assuring her that he had always been thankful for the Duke's continued support of the royal family. But he quickly changed the subject, curious about what prompted her to bring this up now, and asked what the outcome of his confession to her was. Ella's eyes widened in surprise. Bewildered, she asked in amazement if he had known about her father's position all along. The Emperor held his head high and answered confidently that of course he knew, asking self-deprecatingly if he looked like an incompetent ruler who couldn't tell his allies from his enemies. Even more confused, Ella asked with a trembling voice why he had proposed to her if he knew everything. Various thoughts raced through her mind. She wondered if he truly had genuine feelings for her, but quickly dismissed the idea completely. She continued to analyze the situation in her mind, thinking that his marriage proposal might just be a way to publicly solidify his position within the royal family, or perhaps there was another hidden reason, before chiding herself for having such thoughts. The Emperor noticed her distraction, walked closer, and suddenly grabbed her hand. He condemned her misunderstanding, angrily asking if she really thought he had proposed to her just to covet the power of the ducal family, to which Ella retorted, asking if that wasn't the real reason. A look of pain and disappointment crossed his face. He asked her seriously if she saw him as such a heartless man that he would propose to a woman he didn't love just to gain a trivial amount of power. He continued to scold her, marveling that after all these years of her having feelings for him, she still didn't understand the truth of his character. Ella then replied coolly that she really didn't know what kind of man he was. Ella continued in a sorrowful tone, explaining that in all these years, he had never once told her anything about himself. Seeing him look pained by her words, she reminded him that even when she had greeted him, spoken to him, and sent him letters and gifts in the past, she had received no response. Tears streamed down Ella's face as she confessed that the only thing she could understand from his constant silence and neglect was that he hated her. The Emperor, shocked by her words, vehemently denied it, assuring her that there had never been a single day in his life that he had hated her. Ella looked at him, confused, tears still falling, questioning what he meant by his words versus his past actions. The Emperor recalled what she had said to him earlier about novels, how she had told him that you can't understand a story by just reading the prologue, that the curtain had only just been raised. The Emperor repeated her words, saying that a reader cannot judge a work before it's finished, adding that their play had only just begun and that how the plot developed from this moment on was up to him. The Emperor lowered his gaze seriously and told her frankly that even if he explained everything to her now, he didn't expect her to understand his position without any conditions or reservations. He pleaded with her to listen to him and his story until the very end. The Emperor began to recount his dark past, explaining how his father, the late Emperor, had ascended to the throne after ruthlessly purging all of his brothers, leaving only his younger brother, Tiel. He added that, as if to atone for those terrible sins, his father had showered his uncle, Tiel, with endless affection and attention, treating him exceptionally well. The Emperor went on to point out that after his father named him Crown Prince and future Emperor, Tiel's love turned to resentment, and he began to unleash all his anger and hatred upon him. He explained that this revenge started with small things, like destroying his tools and personal belongings, but things quickly escalated, and Tiel began to destroy and kill everything and every living creature he cherished or loved. The memory continued, showing Tiel watching them maliciously as they played in the garden as children. The Emperor remembered Tiel approaching him with a demonic smile, hinting that he had noticed how attached and serious he was about the little girl. The Emperor admitted painfully that from that fateful day on, he decided to hide everything and everyone he held dear, fearing they would be harmed because of him. He recalled his ascension to the throne, explaining that he had mistakenly believed that holding power and being crowned emperor would be enough to end this threat and protect those he loved. The Emperor revealed that he had miscalculated, never realizing that his decision to distance himself from her would cost him his last chance to win her heart. The memory took him back to that day, when he stood among the bodies of assassins, realizing that his decision had been a grave mistake. Ella also recalled the memory of that day, remembering that she had indeed smelled blood. At the time, she had been consumed by tears and thought the metallic taste was just an illusion from crying so hard. She described herself now as a fool for not having realized the truth back then. The Emperor seemed moved by her words, surprised that she had noticed. Ella broke down, crying and blaming him, demanding to know why he hadn't told her the truth sooner, instead of waiting until after he had rejected her, hurt her, and made her a laughingstock in front of everyone. She screamed in anguish, asserting that if she had known his true feelings, she would have done anything for him and waited for him forever. The Emperor looked at her with deep remorse and apologized to her. He explained to her that he thought distancing himself from her was the best way to protect her, but she continued to cry, asking if he knew how much she had suffered living alone all these years. The Emperor walked closer to her, gently cradled her face, and promised that he would never let her be alone again, and that he would tell and show her everything. Then he unexpectedly asked her if she would be willing to give him another chance before she started seeing Daniel. She was taken aback by the question. He pressed on, asking if it was too late or if her feelings for Daniel were really that strong. Infuriated by his assumption, Ella shouted in his face, explaining that if she loved Daniel, she wouldn't be out here walking alone with the Emperor right now. The Emperor's face lit up with hope, and he asked if that meant she still loved him. Ella averted her face and replied that she wasn't sure, then added that if he really wanted to be with her, he would have to prove it. The Emperor smiled enthusiastically, promising to do his best. As they continued their walk, he offered to carry her on his back since it was dark and dangerous, and he was injured, but she refused. So he insisted she stay close to him, reminding her that she had just seen with her own eyes how he had dispatched the attackers in that short time. His uncle, Tiel, was at that moment recalling the scene he had witnessed from the bushes, as he had seen everything. He began to remember what he saw as he threatened his men that they would face a fate worse than a prison cell if they disobeyed his orders. Although his men had ignored the sounds Ella made nearby, Tiel had sensed someone's presence. Tiel remembered the girl's name, Ella Wildenbesten, The memory took him back to his childhood when he would often see them playing together. He remembered she used to call him brother and thought that he couldn't allow her to be harmed. But his malicious smile betrayed his dark intentions. He felt that since they had known each other for so long, he must now give her some special attention. Just then, one of Tiel's men burst into the room to report an emergency, saying all the assassins had been killed. He confirmed to Tiel that Emperor Robros and Miss Ella were both perfectly safe. Tiel flew into a rage, berating his subordinate, as he had given explicit instructions to strike when the Emperor was alone. One of the men informed his master that the Emperor had been walking with Ella. Tiel thought contemptuously that despite the Emperor's overconfidence, he was still a failure, believing he had no real power, only empty pride. He expressed his extreme displeasure with such incompetence, which disgusted him. The subordinate apologized for the mission's failure, blaming some unforeseen factors, to which Tiel replied with veiled sarcasm that he was sure that was the case. With a smile that hid a threat, Tiel continued his questioning, wondering if this failure was intentional, which the subordinate hastily and vehemently denied. Tiel then reminded him of the fate of the incompetent fools who had tried to get close to him in the past, and the man bowed, confirming he remembered clearly. But Tiel suddenly changed his tune, laughing loudly and clapping his subordinate on the shoulder, saying he was just kidding and telling him not to be so tense. The man was bewildered by this shift. However, Tiel hid his true intentions behind this joke, thinking with a sly smile that there was no need to be angry, because in the end, everything would be his. He then confidently asked his subordinate if he wasn't right, and the man immediately agreed. Tiel gave a clear order, stressing that they must ensure no harm came to Ella, reasoning that there was no benefit in making an enemy of Duke Wildenbesten, which his man acknowledged. Meanwhile, elsewhere, one of the Emperor's aides was extremely worried, warning His Majesty that if he kept unwrapping the bandage on his wound, he would make it worse. The Emperor examined his bandaged arm and coolly commented that there was too little blood, wondering if he could get more out. He then revealed his plan to his shocked aide, explaining that he wanted the wound to look severe enough that she would rush to him anxiously the moment she saw it. He even joked about breaking his arm altogether, since that would look truly painful, which sent his aide into a panic, begging him not to do it, because his own head would be on the line. At that moment, Ella was sitting in her room when she suddenly heard the door being pushed open. She was surprised to see His Majesty the Emperor appear and called out to him. Ella rushed to him anxiously, asking if he was all right. He feigned weakness, claiming his bandage had come loose and that he'd had a bad fall, injuring his head. Ella helped him into the room and asked him to rest while he groaned in pain. After he sat down, she began to re-bandage his arm, wondering how the dressing could have come undone so easily. The Emperor watched her with a gentle gaze, thinking to himself how lovely she looked. Just then, the Emperor thanked her for being there, claiming he had been on the verge of collapsing. Ella told him she was really worried and asked him not to say such things. He then tried to reassure her with a joke, saying he was the type to heal quickly even from broken bones, which made her anxiously ask if he had broken a bone just now. He quickly corrected himself, explaining that it happened in the past. But his words threw Ella into a panic, and she loudly questioned how he dared to bring up such a serious matter only now. The Emperor was delighted by her concern, interpreting her interest as definitive proof of her love for him. He continued his act, claiming that his heart was pounding and his limbs were going numb due to his intense love. In fact, his body was trembling from nervousness, but Ella took his words seriously, believing them to be severe medical symptoms. She thought he was suffering from heart disease and numbness in his limbs. She stood up abruptly, announcing that she would go call a doctor immediately. Surprised by her reaction, the Emperor called out to her, trying to stop her and explaining that she had misunderstood. As he tried to stop her from leaving, she lost her balance and fell. But he quickly handled the situation and caught her, finding himself holding her in his arms as they fell to the floor. Ella looked at him in surprise, asking in a suspicious tone if he hadn't said he was really injured. Ella sarcastically commented that his bones seemed very strong and sturdy. So the Emperor replied, trying to salvage the situation, saying that he had already told her he recovered recovered quickly. He added that his recovery speed seemed particularly fast that day, all thanks to her being by his side, and expressed his gratitude to her. Ella saw through the deception and angrily questioned him, asking if his claim of collapsing in pain was just a lie, an excuse to get close to her. She expressed how worried she had been at the time and described his behavior as terrible. So he apologized, admitting he had exaggerated a bit, but insisted that the pain he felt was real. Then he explained to her that the pain was not physical, but a heartache caused by his intense desire to see her. Ella was stunned, her cheeks blushing, as she told him that saying these things now was useless. So he assured her that he would tell her something even more pitiful. He expressed painfully that even if he confessed his feelings wholeheartedly, she still thought it was all just a lie. So she responded, asking if the girl who had been ignored for 8 years wasn't more pitiful. The Emperor regretfully admitted that it was his fault and sincerely apologized to her. He admitted that no matter what happened, he shouldn't have hurt her, acknowledging that he was indeed a coward. He continued to express his deep remorse for avoiding and rejecting her during that time. When he left her alone, the Emperor told her that he didn't expect her to accept him, nor did he mind if she made him suffer or treated him harshly. He suggested that she could ignore him until her anger subsided, just as he had done to her in the past, and promised her that from now on, he would confess his love to her every day. Then he looked straight into her eyes and confessed his love, apologizing for saying it so late. Ella was moved, tears welling up in her eyes. The Emperor gently stroked her head as she wiped away her tears, expressing her frustration with the situation. She thought to herself that she had planned to take revenge on him if he confessed to her again, but now her plan had failed. Then she seriously warned him that this was the last time he would do such a thing. She added with a joking threat that if he did it again, she would go study abroad in a country full of handsome men. A smile bloomed on the Emperor's face, delighted by her threat, which showed her jealousy. In a moment of uncontrollability, he suddenly pulled her into his arms, and she screamed in surprise. He held her tightly, expressing his intense love for her. After they sat together, Ella warned him one last time that if he pretended to be injured again, she would definitely break his bones for real next time. The Emperor swallowed nervously. Ella thought that moment was the end of a long, unrequited love and the beginning of a sincere romance. She was wrong, as things soon began to take a strange and unexpected turn. On one side of the palace, her brother Elvin was anxiously looking for Emperor Robros, who had disappeared again. Elsewhere, Ella's friends were also looking for her after she went missing. Hilka guessed she might be lost, but Vandir denied this, insisting that Ella knew the palace better than anyone. Vandir added that even if she was lost, she was likely enjoying exploring new places, so there was no need to worry. But Randall searched for her anxiously, while Renee wondered where she might have gone and what would happen if the Duchess came looking for her. The group of ladies searching for Ella was surprised by the appearance of Elvin and his sister. So Renee jokingly wondered if the Emperor and Ella might be together, but Elvin flatly denied the idea. Meanwhile, Ella's voice came from behind a closed door, asking His Majesty if she couldn't move that chess piece. In a secluded room, Ella was playing chess with the Emperor. She explained to him that if he moved the piece to a certain spot, he would lose the chance to win. He seemed to understand her advice. The Emperor acknowledged the difficult situation, but he made an unexpected move and took her queen, which surprised her greatly. Ella looked frustrated, realizing she was going to lose again, so she praised his chess skills, assuming he had extensive experience. But he surprised her by revealing that this was his first time playing chess, leaving her deeply admiring his superior intellect. His Majesty smiled and explained that when he focused on a quick victory, somehow he won every time. Confused, Ella asked him why he wanted to finish so quickly. He looked at her deeply and told her the reason was that he would rather focus on her than the game. Ella was incredibly shy and covered her face with her hands, expressing how embarrassed she was. He smiled, describing her as very cute. In another part of the palace, Elvin was walking with his sister, who noticed that she hadn't seen this place before. Elvin explained to her that this was a rarely used part of the palace, and the only place where His Majesty would hide, asserting that they would find him soon. His sister described His Majesty as a trapped mouse, but Elvin objected to that description, reminding her that the Emperor was the highest-ranking person in the Empire. but she reminded him that in his childhood, he had promised her that he would become her knight and protect her. Other ladies overheard this conversation, and Randall expressed surprise and admiration that he had made such a vow. Elvin admitted that he did say it once. Memories resurfaced, going back to when Elvin and Emperor Robros were children, practicing fencing together with wooden swords. After they declared they were as close as brothers, young Robros asked Miss Bianca to call him Sir Robros, and she was surprised by the knightly title. Meanwhile, a lady scolded young Elvin for injuring the crown prince, but another lady defended him, explaining that it was just play with wooden swords requiring only a simple bandage, and that she had given Elvin that gear because they wanted to role-play as knights. The former emperor intervened in the conversation, jokingly asking Bianca if Robros had become her knight and asking her to treat him well. Back in the present, Bianca wondered whose idea of playing knight actually was. Elvin admitted it was his idea, and they commented on how benevolent his majesty and his family were. But Elvin warned Bianca to watch her words when talking about the emperor, as anyone hearing the conversation could cause trouble. Randall pointed out that it must be the last room and stated she didn't want to become a criminal just for trying to protect her sister. So another person agreed with her, suggesting they go in. Elvin and his companions suddenly burst into the room, apologizing for the abrupt intrusion. Both Ella and the emperor were surprised by their appearance. Elvin wanted to know what exactly they were doing there. Bianca noticed the chessboard and concluded they were playing chess. Ella was extremely confused by the situation, stammering as she tried to explain, while anger was written all over Elvin's face. The emperor tried to calm Ella down, holding her hand and asking her to compose herself and let him explain the situation. But Elvin flew into a rage, shouting in the emperor's face, ordering him to let go of his sister's hand and calling him a shameless man. While the ladies were shocked by this unexpected reaction, the emperor stepped forward, standing in front of Ella, apologizing for not telling everyone sooner and insisting that he was planning to do so very soon. Then he held Ella's hand in front of them and solemnly announced that Miss Ella and he were in a serious relationship. Hearing this declaration, Elvin burned with rage, remembering all the pain the emperor had caused his sister when he abandoned her and left her alone. He wondered how he dared to claim he was serious now. Then, in a firm voice, he declared that this was completely unacceptable, that the Wildenbesten family would never agree to his relationship with Ella, and ordered him not to approach her again. The emperor tried to speak, but Elvin interrupted him, declaring he didn't want to hear that excuse about protecting Ella again. He added that even if it were true, it couldn't erase the suffering she had endured, and all he hoped for was the happiness of his sister, who had recently regained her smile. Elvin ended his firm conversation with the emperor, demanding he stop swaying his sister's heart and vowing that he wouldn't let her taste the bitterness of sadness again. He was determined to protect her smile at any cost. Later, Ella sat alone on a garden bench, letting out a deep sigh full of sadness. Elvin and Bianca both watched her closely. Bianca reminded him that he had sworn to protect Ella's happiness and smile, and pointed out to him that she didn't look happy at all, but rather shrouded in a gloomy atmosphere. Bianca noticed the depth of Ella's depression, so Elvin suggested that if they waited long enough, time would solve everything. But Bianca expressed doubt about this. Bianca recalled Ella's past, thinking of the 12 years of waiting, and wondered if that long wait wasn't enough for any heart. Elvin admitted internally that he knew very well what his sister truly wanted was to be by Robros's side. But Bianca confronted him with the cruel truth, asking how they could ignore the pain he had caused her. Elvin agreed with her, admitting that just thinking about it made him so angry he sometimes woke up from his sleep. Bianca reminded him of the more important thing, something they both knew well. In another scene, Emperor Robros stood before Ella, who was sitting on the bench. It turned out that for her brother, the most important thing was not revenge, but guarding his sister's joy, a joy reflected in her happy expression as she accepted a flower from the emperor. A genuine, bright smile bloomed on Ella's face, and the emperor responded with a gaze full of happiness. The emperor told her he brought her that flower because it reminded him of her. She answered him with immense happiness that she liked it very much. Their quiet moment was soon interrupted by her brother Elvin suddenly appearing and shouting out to them. Elvin said something to her that made her beam with joy, and also surprised the Emperor with a sudden shift in Elvin's stance. Bianca smiled as she watched Elvin forcefully and happily hugging his sister Ella. The group gathered together, and Bianca expressed her happiness that things finally worked out smoothly. Elsewhere, Ella's two friends were enjoying desserts. Renee asked Randall if those desserts were for Ella. Randall replied that Ella didn't need them anymore, implying she had found her own happiness. With the Emperor, suddenly, the Duke and Duchess Wildenbesten, along with the Emperor Emeritus and Empress, appeared, sternly asking what was going on. The Duchess scolded a young lady for eating while walking, considering it unbecoming of a noble lady. But the Empress added with a gentle smile that it reminded her of her past self, and advised her to be more careful because people love to judge. So the two young ladies apologized. The Duke and the Emperor Emeritus looked at the scene before them in surprise, murmuring in disbelief. The two young ladies realized the elders had stumbled upon Ella and Robros sitting intimately together. The Duke and Emperor Emeritus conversed, expressing how glad they were to see Ella and Robros getting along, wondering if Robros had finally confessed his feelings, and noting that he looked much more relaxed recently. The two young ladies realized the elders had misunderstood the situation, thinking it was just friendship and reconciliation between Ella and Robros, rather than a romantic relationship. They commented that the elders hadn't noticed the truth yet, but they predicted it was only a matter of time before everything was revealed. The next day, at the palace, an aide was trying to stop Emperor Robros from leaving his seat again. The Emperor insisted he had urgent business. His aide tried to remind him of a visiting delegation from Friendly Nation. The Emperor assured him he would return by evening, then walk toward his important destination. The Emperor's aide continued to wail and plead, complaining about the young lady persistently asking about His Majesty's whereabouts, and begged him not to leave them alone to face the situation. The Emperor glared at him with cold, annoyed eyes, asserting that such annoyance was exactly why he refused to go. The Emperor sternly explained that he handled all state affairs without delay, but he preferred to avoid activities that were purely social obligations. But the aide continued to clutch his clothes, crying and begging him to do it for him just this once. The Emperor skillfully broke free from the aide's grip and continued on his way, leaving the aide collapsing on the ground, screaming in a breakdown, calling out to His Majesty and describing his actions as unforgivable. Far away from that chaos, Ella and the Emperor sat in a sunny room. She expressed great appreciation for the taste of the dessert. The Emperor offered to give her his share as well, but she politely refused, thinking it inappropriate. When he asked her why, she shyly replied that she was afraid of gaining weight. The Emperor reached out and gently stroked her face, commenting that her gaining weight would indeed be a worrying matter. Ella was surprised by his words. He continued to flirt openly, explaining that she was already charming, and if she became even more attractive and lovable, he wouldn't know what to do. Ella's face burned with shyness, and she confusedly asked him to stop teasing her. The Emperor laughed happily, insisting he was just joking, and apologized to her, explaining that it was because she was so cute that he did it. This intimate moment was suddenly interrupted by a stern voice asking what they were doing in such a place. Both were surprised by the appearance of Duke Wildenbesten, the Emperor Emeritus, and their wives. Empress Abina commented on the reunion with a smile. Ella froze in place, anxiously wondering if they could find an excuse to explain their situation, while the Emperor sighed helplessly, admitting their affair was undoubtedly exposed. The Duke looked at his daughter Ella with a sharp, angry gaze, sternly scolding her for being bold and monopolizing His Majesty's precious time. The Duke continued to scold, insisting she shouldn't hinder a man who carried heavy national responsibilities. But Empress Abina intervened calmly with a smile, pointing out that the matter wasn't worth getting so angry about, and that it was a delight to see them getting along harmoniously like in the past. The Duke bowed respectfully, apologizing for his arguably immature daughter hindering the Emperor's precious time. But the Emperor politely refused the apology, asking the Duke to raise his head immediately. The Emperor gratefully noted that the Duke was not only a noble, but also his teacher, whom he regarded as a second father, recalling the principle, one day as a teacher, a father for life. The Duke and Emperor Robros joked that adding a fourth son beyond his three would be a heavy burden. The Duke apologized to the Emperor, asking him to be more aware of his numerous responsibilities. Ella followed with an apology. The Emperor Emeritus commented that seeing them close now was a heartwarming scene. The Emperor Emeritus smiled slyly, assuring the Duke that the Emperor wasn't as busy as he imagined, confidently adding that he was speaking from his own past experience. Meanwhile, the Duke thought to himself that he was actually the one who bore the greatest burden of annoyance because of that. The Emperor murmured an excuse that everything had its side effects, while a look of annoyance appeared on the Duke's face. The Empress took this opportunity to approach Ella, whispering kindly with a warm smile, suggesting she slip away and escape from there. The Emperor immediately gave a thumbs up, confirming the escape route is secure thanks to his mother's intervention. Ella shows a surprised and admiring expression, taken aback by this benevolent collusion. As Ella and the Emperor slip away, a heated argument erupts between the Duke and the Emperor Emeritus. The latter accuses the Duke, as he had previously told him to leave things to him and go home. The Duke, however, responds angrily, explaining that he was expounding on the principles of social welfare, which are not granted unconditionally, and accuses him of being the one who fails to understand. They successfully escape and leave the crowd's sight. Ella, relieved, softly says they made it through safely, and the Emperor agrees. Ella laughs lightly, saying it was the first time she had seen her father and the Emperor Emeritus argue like that, finding it amusing and describing them as being like little children. The Emperor completely agrees. Ella compares their behavior to the arguments between the Emperor and her brother, Elvin. The Emperor then playfully points out to her that the recent scene was exactly like how she and Elvin bicker. They exchange friendly glances and then simultaneously burst into sincere laughter, reflecting the intimacy and harmony they have achieved. Afterward, the scene shifts to a hall crowded with guests. Ella's mother, the Duchess, suddenly appears with the Duke by her side, calling out to Ella and startling her. Meanwhile, the Emperor, standing nearby, notices his mother, the Empress, clearing her throat and glaring at him with a meaningful look, causing him to immediately become attentive. The Empress sternly scolds her son, warning him not to always leave his seat and questioning if he's trying to slip away again, deeming it inappropriate for the Emperor to abandon his guests at his own banquet. The Duke chimes in, agreeing with the Empress that his behavior is discourteous, and suspiciously notes that they have been spending a lot of time together recently, pointedly asking if they are trying to sneak off together again. The Emperor and Ella are stunned by the direct accusation. They rush to deny it simultaneously and vehemently, their faces showing extreme panic. Seeing their exaggerated denial, the Duke squints his eyes suspiciously, while the two break out in a cold sweat, realizing their secret might have just been exposed in front of their families. The Emperor, succumbing to the situation, nervously lowers his head and is about to confess, but the Duchess interrupts him, saying it seems she has misunderstood. Hearing this, the Emperor looks up, confused. The Emperor Emeritus and the Empress find it an amusing misunderstanding, laughing as they recall their own dating days when they were young, assuming the young couple was just trying to sneak away from the party. However, the Duke looks at them sternly, reminding everyone that they are now adults and must behave with utmost discretion, which makes Ella nervous while the Emperor stands by quietly. As the Emperor and Ella move out of sight, she laughs in confusion, saying they managed to get away with it again. The Emperor jokes with her that if they keep this up, they might be able to hide their affair forever, expressing surprise that no one has noticed their relationship yet. The Emperor smiles confidently to reassure her, saying that with him around, there's no need to worry, and suggests they can justify their absences by pretending to fix their appearance or search for a lost friend. Back in the banquet hall, the elders of both families stand together harmoniously. The Emperor Emeritus expresses his pleasure at seeing the young ones all grown up and reliable, suggesting that the two of them should also take a walk and reminisce about the past. Meanwhile, Ella's friends are hiding behind a pillar. Randall expresses relief that they narrowly avoided the elders, while Renee suggests they stay away from them for a while. Daniel suddenly appears behind them, curious as to why they are there. One of them replies that the mere thought of being with the elders gives her a headache. Daniel, surprised, asks why they're leaving instead of entering the banquet hall. Randall covers his mouth, and they pull him along with them, ordering him to follow quietly without making a sound. They then arrive at a secluded corner of the palace garden, where Randall confirms the spot is safe and no one will come. Daniel, anxious and confused, asks the two girls the reason for this sudden move. Renee tells him to be completely quiet and announces they have something very important to tell him. Randall tells Daniel that Ella and His Majesty, Emperor Robros, are already dating. At this shocking moment, the Duke, the Duchess, the Emperor Emeritus, and his wife emerge from the bushes behind them, just as Renee is sternly telling them to lower their voices, even though no one is around. The elders all wear expressions of shock and astonishment upon hearing the news that Ella and the Emperor are dating. The group of young people freezes in place, terrified by the sudden shock, and the two girls realize the place wasn't as safe as they thought. The Duke steps forward with a furious and terrifying expression, concluding that since they overheard the conversation, it's likely others have as well, and demands that Daniel explain exactly what those words meant. The Empress and the Duchess intervene to calm the situation, pointing out that there's no need to blame anyone right now, and suggesting that if what they heard is true, they must confront Ella and the Emperor directly and talk to them. The Duke agrees to this proposal, his face grim, deciding to postpone the confrontation until after the banquet, while the Emperor Emeritus concludes that tonight will be very long and difficult. In another corner of the palace, the Emperor and Ella are standing in front of her room. Ella confesses that the day has been nerve-wracking from morning till night, but she still had a lot of fun. The Emperor looks at her, smiles, and points out that he has protected her once again today, so he believes he deserves a reward. Ella curiously asks him what kind of reward he wants. The Emperor moves closer to her, intimately taking both of her hands in his. They whisper softly to each other about how close they are in that moment. But this romantic moment is suddenly shattered by the sound of a voice, and the Emperor demands to know who is standing there. The Emperor turns to find the Duke standing in the darkness, his gaze sharp and filled with extreme anger, piercing through them. The Emperor tries to control the situation and protect Ella, claiming to the Duke that what he saw was just a misunderstanding, but the Duke repeats the word with disapproval and utter coldness. Ella, terrified, steps forward and tries to defend herself, pleading with her father to listen to her explanation and insisting that things are not as he thinks. The Duke, burning with anger, looks at her and pointedly asks if they take him for a fool who would believe such weak excuses. He cuts them off firmly, telling them to save their excuses because he already knows the whole truth. The Emperor then steps in front of Ella, trying to shield her from her father's wrath. The Duke rebukes the Emperor with harsh words, deeming it improper for a man to sneak into a lady's quarters, and the fact that this man is the Emperor makes it completely unacceptable. The Duke continues to berate them, accusing them of being oblivious to their own status and lacking the most basic sense of responsibility and reason, and warns them not to confuse physical maturity with true adulthood. Without another word, the Duke violently grabs Ella's wrist and pulls her away forcefully, declaring the discussion over and that she must come with him immediately, while Ella screams his name in shock. The Emperor desperately tries to grab Ella, reaching out his hand to her and telling her to wait. Duke Wildenbesten stands there, his face filled with towering rage and severity. The Emperor, emotional, cries out Ella's name, while the Duke holds his daughter's arm tightly, pulling her away from the place. Ella, confused and anxious, asks her father where he is taking her like this. The Duke answers her in a tone that brooks no argument, his face still furious, insisting that they are going home immediately. Once home, the Duke issues a stern command. From that day forward, Ella is strictly forbidden from taking a single step outside the house, leaving her in shock. Ella, in tears, vehemently protests, calling the decision unreasonable and reminding him that she is no longer a 12-year-old child but a grown woman. The Duke turns back and coldly replies that sneaking around and avoiding people has nothing to do with adult behavior. He adds firmly, warning her not to even think about leaving the house without his explicit permission, then forcefully slams the door behind him. Ella stands alone in her room, completely stunned, murmuring in disbelief that her father can't be serious. Meanwhile, Elvin, Bianca, and her mother notice the change in the tense atmosphere, anxiously wondering if Ella will be all right after all that has happened. Her mother points out that this is the first time the Duke has ever confined Ella, reflecting the gravity of the situation. The two ladies jokingly speculate whether there might be some romantic reason behind the confinement, but Elvin, annoyed by their conversation, dismisses it as the act of an overprotective father and seriously asserts that this is no time for jokes. Back at the palace, the Emperor is standing in his private suite when the door suddenly opens and his aide, Marquis Rodin, walks in, calling for His Majesty. As he enters, the emperor unexpectedly throws a piece of cloth over his head. This leaves the man confused and bewildered, wondering what on earth His Majesty is doing. The emperor expresses his dissatisfaction with the clothes brought to him, deeming them completely unsuitable, and demands his aide bring more elegant and refined attire. The aide looks at him expressionlessly, reminding him that a grand banquet is currently underway and disapproving of his preoccupation with choosing clothes at such a time. The emperor defends his concern for his appearance, explaining that he urgently needs to make a good and profound impression on someone, noting that this person is very conservative in nature. He adds with dramatic emotion that the person is very stubborn and also a teacher and hero whom he respects immensely, referring to Duke Wildenbesten. The aide observes him silently for a moment before reluctantly admitting that, considering the current circumstances, the emperor's point is not entirely wrong. The emperor continues to hastily toss clothes aside, declaring there is no time to waste, and asks his aide to help him appear on that day in the most splendid, solemn, and noble manner ever. Thanks to these swift preparations, the emperor dons his full official uniform, finally standing in all his elegance and royal majesty. The emperor orders a carriage drawn by the fastest horses to be prepared immediately, which makes the aide wonder in surprise about the reason for him wearing the full official uniform. Meanwhile, Ella's two friends and Daniel talk about Ella's sudden disappearance, speculating that the reason might be that her affair with the emperor has been exposed, and think that perhaps they should go and apologize. Daniel tries to calm them down, insisting that there is no confirmed news yet, but he quickly becomes nervous and confused himself, asking them how they plan to handle this complicated situation. The emperor walks out with a firm and quick pace, his aide running behind him, asking in shock if he is going to a funeral and reminding him that a formal meeting has already been arranged between the two families. The emperor, with a grim expression, answers him, pointing out that things could indeed end up turning into something like a funeral. The aide asks in horror who the funeral would be for, and the emperor replies with extreme coldness that it would be his own. The aide is scared out of his wits, screaming in terror, not understanding what His Majesty has just said. The emperor, however, continues to walk steadily towards the carriage as the guards clear a path for him. The emperor turns to his aide with a calm and determined smile, asking him to pray for his safe return, while the aide, breaking down, begs him not to say such ominous things. After the emperor gives the order to depart, his royal carriage sets off. The coachman responds to the command, and the horses immediately stir. As the carriage sways on its way, the emperor gazes silently out the window, lost in thought. His memory goes back to his early childhood, standing on the training grounds, watching with rapt attention and fascination as a younger Duke Wildenbesten launched a series of attacks against the young emperor. The little one tries to summon his magic, forming a glowing golden shield to block his attacks. The boy grits his teeth, struggling to maintain the magic shield while enduring a powerful blow, causing magical fragments to scatter everywhere. The little one stands there, panting, as the Duke approaches him with steady steps. The Duke points with his glowing finger, explaining to his student how he deflected the attack with just one finger, demonstrating his power. The Duke wonders why there is such an extreme emphasis on defense, believing that attack should precede defense. He tells him that this way of thinking proves he is still clinging to his ambitions and impulses. The boy insists on his view, arguing it's better to eliminate the enemy first. But the Duke explains to him with wisdom that a ruler can never predict the time or place of an attack, and this is the true burden an emperor must bear. The boy becomes agitated, insisting that he will attack any suspicious person immediately, which displeases the Duke. He rebukes him, asking how he can claim to strike first when he doesn't even know the enemy's identity. The little one confidently sticks to his point, calling anyone who doesn't understand this simple truth a fool. The Duke then counters with a sharp question, asking if he thinks his father, the previous emperor, who was betrayed by his relatives, was a fool. The boy stubbornly replies that he does think so, and as a result, he immediately receives a light, disciplinary tap on the head from the Duke, causing him to cry out in pain. The Duke glares at him with a stern gaze, ordering him to weigh his words carefully and not be rash. Then the Duke leans down and whispers in the boy's ear, admitting that his father, John, was indeed a fool, but he stresses to him that this must remain a secret between them, not to be heard by anyone. The boy's eyes widen in surprise. He asks in disbelief if his father was really a fool. The Duke confirms it with a calm smile, explaining that his father was naive enough to believe in the good in others. The Duke looks up at the sky and adds that this naivety caused his father to be hurt many times, but he points out that John was lucky to have many good people around him. The Duke smiles nostalgically, recalling the past, and admits that John was the first person to make him realize that such naivety was not pure foolishness. As the boy realizes how much deep respect and affection his teacher held for his late father, a warm smile appears on his face. The Duke, once again speaking firmly as both a father figure and a teacher, tells him that considering everything John went through, trusting anyone is in itself a huge risk. The memory shifts to narrate how John used to always repeat that the royal family was a place stained with blood. As the legitimate son, John had always been a thorn in the side of his other brothers, who harbored hatred for him and conspired to frame him. Despite this, John believed that if he tried hard enough, his true feelings would reach them, which prompted him to offer gifts with a smile, trying to win their affection. But his brothers often mocked those naive expectations and were accustomed to constantly deceiving and manipulating him. This situation continued without mercy from everyone except one person. John used to read alone until sleep overcame him. He remembered his younger brother, Tiel, approaching him as he slept and giving him a wooden toy as a gift. When John woke up, he was ecstatic. To him, Tiel was the only person he could trust in this palace. The memory shows John and Tiel running hand in hand, with innocent smiles in the cold and ruthless palace. The young Duke used to watch their laughter with a heart full of joy and harmony. But the narration explains that it was precisely this close bond that made what happened later all the more cruel, painful, and unimaginable. As the threads of the conspiracy became clear, a secret plot was hatched to murder the legal wife and John. A dark hand quietly slipped poison into a wine glass. John realized that the mastermind behind this despicable plot was none other than Tiel's mother, and his expression grew stern and cold. The Emperor recalled his father John's past. He had watched his own mother cough up blood and die, and in that cruel moment, he realized that the innocence and sincerity he possessed were worthless, unable to protect the ones he loved. Afterward, with his hands stained with blood, John swiftly eliminated all the brothers who had participated in the conspiracy, leaving only his younger brother Tiel. After clearing all obstacles, John was crowned and became the emperor. But after those bloody events, his relationship with his younger brother Tiel was never the same, becoming cold and distant. The Duke explained to the young emperor that even after John became emperor, he remained wary and on guard against Tiel. But when Robros was born, things took a turn. Tiel showed extreme joy and immense happiness, as if Robros were his own child. The Duke still remembered that scene clearly, describing it as a beautiful, peaceful, and reassuring sight. The Duke confessed that at that very moment, for the first time, he had the thought that perhaps trusting someone wasn't always the wrong choice. Listening to his teacher, young Robros smiled innocently and concluded that his uncle Tiel was a truly good person. But the Duke placed a hand on the boy's head, wondering to himself whether Tiel was a good person or just good at hiding his true feelings. The Duke explained to his student that this was precisely why he was training him, advising him that he could trust others, but should not have overly high expectations. Young Robros expressed that this was too difficult for him. The Duke smiled calmly and explained to him that this difficulty was the true price of ascending to the imperial throne. The scene returns to the present, where Emperor Robros sits with the Duke, who asks coldly if His Majesty's visit was merely to recount an old story. The Duke took a sip of tea and continued sternly, saying that even if the Emperor were to bow and beg to be with his daughter, it would not be enough. He didn't understand the point of bringing up the royal family's history now. The Emperor, with a serious expression and a sharp gaze, answered him, asserting that the story represented a very important lesson. The Emperor added that there was a secret the Duke knew nothing about. Surprised, the Duke asked with interest what this secret could be. The Emperor revealed that it concerned his uncle, Tiel. The scene shifts back again to Robros' childhood, where he is running happily, calling for his uncle to show him something, while Tiel sits harmoniously with his father, John, and the Duke. Tiel gently stroked young Robros' head, smiling as he remarked how attached the child was to him. With a bright smile, young Robros expressed his admiration for his uncle, calling him his father's brother and a very kind person. Tiel smiled mysteriously and replied warmly that being called a kind person was a wonderful compliment he cherished deeply. A series of memories flashed by, showing how Tiel spent time with young Robros, accompanying him on walks, tutoring him in the library, training with him with wooden swords, and delighting him with glowing orbs conjured by magic. On one occasion, Robros showed a completed work to Tiel, who praised him lavishly and predicted he would become a respected emperor just like his father. Hearing this praise, young Robros's eyes sparkled with joy and pride, and he asked excitedly if he really thought so. But these peaceful days soon took a dark turn, as a scene shows Robros sleeping at night, his door creaking open as an unknown figure slips into the darkness, heralding imminent danger. The emperor recalled that night when a mysterious person slipped into his room under the cover of darkness, opened a wooden box, took out a wooden soldier doll, and deliberately damaged it with a sharp tool. The next morning, young Robros awoke to find the box by his bed, and he was baffled when he opened it to find his beloved soldier doll broken. A strange feeling washed over him. He remembered it being intact the day before, which made him wonder if it was just an accident. As he was pondering, his uncle Tiel suddenly appeared and asked him, "What was wrong?" Robros hastily closed the box and forced a smile, saying it was nothing to worry about. His uncle feigned understanding and placed a hand on his shoulder, encouraging him to do his best in his training. Robros thanked him, but he noticed that his uncle's grip was unusually strong, a subtle and menacing signal. This was not the first incident of its kind. Soon, Robros's cherished possessions, from his training sword to his favorite pen, were destroyed one after another. It culminated in him discovering his pet had been killed, and it was then that he realized what was happening was not his own carelessness, but someone's deliberate actions. His suspicions led him to sneak through the palace corridors, where he witnessed a servant handing one of his stolen items to his uncle, Tiel. He was utterly shocked as the terrible truth began to unfold before him. Bit by bit, his suspicions were confirmed as he heard his uncle coldly order the servant to dispose of the item. Young Robros was stunned, realizing that the uncle he had trusted, Tiel, was the mastermind behind all his suffering. He understood then that his father, the emperor, had trusted his brother until the very end, unaware of his betrayal. He recalled his innocent memories with his uncle, how his father had considered them a family, and made a resolution in his heart. He would never forgive him for what he had done. As time went on, Robros learned to hide his true feelings, smiling in front of his uncle while secretly harboring hatred and contempt for him. He decided in his heart that the time to reveal his intentions had not yet come. Realizing the extent of Tiel's influence and his ability to manipulate everyone, he dedicated himself to training and strengthening his power. He swore to end this with his own hands, and so he threw himself into arduous training and studying military maps, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. As he was engrossed in his training, a familiar voice interrupted him. A young Ella appeared in the garden, calling out to him. He turned to her and found her standing before him. She ran to him happily and embraced him, asking why he was at the palace at this hour. She told him that she hadn't come with her father this time, but had specifically asked for his permission to visit him because she missed him. She reminded him that he had promised her she could come visit him anytime. He smiled and gently patted her head, agreeing with her. As they walked together in the imperial great forest, he noted that she seemed very happy to be there. She told him with a radiant smile that the reason she loved this place was because it was where they first met, which surprised him. With an innocent smile and overflowing happiness, young Ella continued that she deeply loved the imperial great forest because it was where she met her beloved highness, and thus she considered it her favorite place. Young Robros smiled back and told her that thanks to her, he believed he would grow to like this place more and more. He then asked if she felt the same, and she immediately replied that of course she did. They walked hand in hand through the sunlit forest. They exchanged happy glances, but these innocent moments were soon interrupted as Robros returned to his painful reality, aware of his uncle's sinister intentions. His uncle, Tiel, was watching him from a distance with a sly smile, thinking the little one had fallen in love, unaware that Rose had seen right through his deception. Rose's features hardened, his eyes glinting with suppressed rage and the determination to one day confront this menace. Just then, Ella approached him cheerfully, suggesting they play together. His sharp and cold refusal shocked and hurt her. With a sad yet firm expression, he told her that he no longer had time to play with her. When she asked him why with tears in her eyes, he replied that it was because he was the crown prince. He then turned and walked away, explaining that there were things more important than a prince, hinting at the responsibilities he shouldered and the dangers around him. He left her standing alone, whispering his name, as he went to focus on his archery practice. Ella, however, misunderstood his distance, thinking sadly that he must have that gloomy look on his face because he was too busy. In fact, she decided she would ask her father if someone was working His Highness too hard. Rose watched her retreating figure and silently vowed that he would not let anyone harm her. And so he dedicated himself to his training with even more fervor, swearing to protect her no matter the cost. The years passed, and he continued to ignore her in public. At one ball, Ella called out to him, but he deliberately turned his face away. So she stood there with a sad expression while he maintained his cold and distant demeanor. During a training session, he charged at his teacher with all his might. A massive wave of magic erupted from the courtyard, eliciting a gasp of amazement from his teacher, who smiled in appreciation. Rose, for his part, stood up, his face filled with determination. The arduous training continued, and Rose demonstrated his new strength, gained through years of hard work, before his teacher, leaving a trail of destruction in the training ground that greatly astonished his master. After the training session, his teacher praised him for his immense progress. To celebrate, he offered to grant him a wish, telling him to ask for anything he wanted. But Rose's mind was entirely on Ella, so he replied that he wanted nothing. He thought to himself that once everything was over, he would tell the Duke the truth directly. So he told him that he would let him know his wish later and implored him to listen when the time came. After becoming a powerful young man, Rose was ready, realizing that all preparations were complete. In a decisive meeting, he confronted his uncle Tiel, who mockingly said that he never thought Rose would be the one to propose this meeting. Emperor Rose proposed a deal between them. Tiel seemed surprised and wondered what the deal was about. Rose boldly declared that he was challenging him to a formal duel, and he laid down a decisive wager, stating that if his uncle won, he would relinquish the imperial throne to him. Tiel's eyes glinted with greed as he asked what would happen if Rose won. Rose answered him firmly that if he were victorious, his uncle would have to leave the imperial palace forever. Tiel laughed mockingly and agreed to the terms, considering it a proposal to his liking. He then coldly declared the duel's start, warning Rose to try not to die. Rose, with a serious expression, also confirmed the start of the confrontation. But Tiel suddenly vanished from before him and launched an attack, inflicting a superficial wound on the Emperor. The Emperor realized Tiel had decided to go all out from the very beginning, but he thought to himself that this was exactly what he had been waiting for, the very moment he had long anticipated. Just as he thought he had him cornered, Tiel launched a powerful magic attack, but his opponent managed to block it with a magical shield. Tiel laughed triumphantly, urging him to continue. And the Emperor thought to himself that he had no need to feel guilty for all the guilt that had been tormenting him. Rose formed a magical shield to deflect the attack and skillfully dodged the blow. Tiel stopped his attack and mockingly asked why he wasn't taking the offensive. But Rose coldly replied, doubting if that was all he had. Enraged by his disdain, Tiel called him an arrogant brat and launched another attack. Rose thought to himself that this was enough, that it was time to end this duel. To Tiel's surprise, magical chains shot out from the ground, wrapping tightly around his body and completely immobilizing him. He screamed in pain and fell to his knees, while Rose stood before him, victorious. Tiel laughed in agony, admitting that blood doesn't lie and calling him a red-eyed monster. Rose, with an icy gaze and eyes glowing red, demanded that he leave as promised. Tiel agreed with a sly smile. In the throne room, the Emperor asked Tiel if he was truly leaving the palace. Tiel replied that he had learned a great deal from the Crown Prince and wished to leave the palace to learn more about the outside world. As he prepared to leave, the young prince mentally ordered him to shut up and leave quickly. The Emperor concluded his conversation with Tiel, while an image of Ella's happy smile echoed in Rose's mind. Realizing realizing he had finally achieved his goal. The Emperor granted Tiel permission to leave and announced that he would use the name Kelton, and as a member of the imperial bloodline, he would be granted a title and sufficient financial resources to maintain his status and dignity. Robros watched as his uncle departed with a steady gait, realizing that it was truly over. After that decisive duel, Robros stood alone in the training grounds, panting, feeling a sense of relief and liberation. He believed that once his uncle was gone, everything would be over. As he was lost in thought, Ella appeared before him, calling his name. He turned to her in surprise, calling her name. She approached him shyly and told him she had a request, and then she asked him if he would be her partner at her coming-of-age ball. He hesitated for a moment, turned away, and said apologetically that he couldn't. He thought to himself that he couldn't answer her yet, but she smiled and asked again, seeming to understand the reason for his hesitation. Because he believed that once Tiel was gone for good, he would be able to answer her request. Robros ignored her and ordered her not to speak to him, but what he thought was that she just needed to wait a little longer. Ella noticed that he had taken her letter. A wave of happiness washed over her, and she jumped for joy, expressing her delight. Shortly after, Tiel's carriage departed from the imperial palace. Under heavy guard, Robros watched from a distance, thinking that this matter was finally over and that he could now finally confess his feelings to Ella. He would tell her everything on the day of her coming-of-age ball, thinking about how surprised she would be. He sat down to write a letter, determined to tell her of his love, that his one-sided love was finally coming to an end. Meanwhile, young noble ladies were arriving at the palace one after another, preparing for the ball. Ella was stepping out of her carriage, her face radiant with a smile and her heart pounding. Robros was waiting for her, imagining the moment he would see her. But he suddenly heard strange noises from outside and realized something suspicious was happening. He looked out the window and saw a group of assassins surrounding the palace. Without a moment's hesitation, he instantly created a magical shield to protect himself. The assassins surrounded him from all sides, ready to attack. Robros felt a strange and unsettling feeling, wondering where it was coming from and whether his Uncle Tiel was behind this. The battle raged on as Robros parried a fatal blow. Robros pondered the identity of this enemy and what he would do if he found out. But he realized that the most important thing now was to end this fight as quickly as possible. Meanwhile, Ella arrives at the ballroom and searches for him among the attendees, thinking he would be there. But all she hears are the whispers of the noble women, who mock her, wondering where she got the audacity to think she could dance with the Emperor. Their mockery continues, saying she is clingy and they don't understand how she could delude herself into thinking she could be his partner. Ella painfully realizes that in their eyes, and in His Majesty's eyes as well, she is nothing more than a natural object of ridicule. Elsewhere, the battle continues, and Robros manages to eliminate the last of the assailants. He stands amidst their bodies, realizing that it is over. He looks out the window towards the brightly lit palace, thinking that she has been waiting for him for a long time, and decides to hurry to her side. But he suddenly stops in front of a mirror, noticing the bloodstains from the battle still on his face. Just as he is at a loss, he hears Ella calling his name. So he hides the assassins' bodies and desperately tries to wipe away the bloodstains, wondering what he should do. Just then, Ella pushes the door open, calling for him, and finds him standing in the midst of the chaos. Ella tells him that she is exhausted with this relationship, and that she will disappear from his sight forever as he wishes. He is still wondering if she saw what happened. Then he remembers her words, saying she was tired of this one-sided love. Memories come flooding back of her promising to never appear before him again and tearfully wishing him to find a wonderful lady. He painfully recalls all this, whispering her name. He realized then that it wasn't over, that as long as she stayed by his side, she would never be safe. And so, he resolved to become the Emperor and take control of everything to ensure no one could harm her. He vowed to himself that once everything was perfect, he would confess his love to her. Back in the present, Ella calls out to him in tears, realizing how difficult this must have been for him. She hugs him tightly, expressing the pain he must have felt bearing it all alone. He gently holds her in his arms, telling her that all he cared about was her safety. But this intimate moment is interrupted by the Duke, who sees the scene. He rises in fury, ordering Ella to leave him at once. Duke Wildenbesten, enraged, sternly rebukes Emperor Robros, questioning how he dares to make excuses after all the pain and suffering he caused his daughter. Not content with words, the Duke unleashes a powerful wave of glowing blue magical energy, warning him not to think that forgiveness would be granted so easily. Rose takes the full force of the blow and is pushed back, groaning as he tries to withstand the overwhelming magical assault. During the attack, the teachings of his master, the Duke, echo in Rose's mind. He remembers his words: "A truly strong person is not one who initiates an attack, but one who can remain calm and steadfast when under assault." The Duke continues to apply magical pressure, his face determined and furious, wondering if the Emperor has finally learned this lesson. Rose stands his ground firmly, surrounding himself with a golden magical shield to deflect the attack, and confidently declares that for his beloved Ella, he will not back down, but will fight to the end. The Duke then tells him that his past advice was not meant for this specific situation. The violent magical clash shatters the room's windows, and the Duke abruptly stops his attack, sternly telling him that this was not his only mistake. The Duke approaches him with a steady pace and a piercing gaze, asserting that his greatest mistake was far more than this. Burning with anger, the Duke demands to know why he didn't tell him and the former Emperor, John, that Tiel was a traitor plotting against them. Rose lowers his gaze, recalling his uncle's cunning, and explains that Tiel had planned meticulously for a long time. Even if he, as a child back then, had raised suspicions, Tiel had already prepared countless ways to escape and survive. Rose clenches his fist tightly, indicating that he had made a decision. He must first gain power until he was strong enough to face him directly and confront him. The Duke looks at him with shock and astonishment, wondering if he made this risky decision entirely on his own. Rose confirms this, pointing out that his father, his teacher the Duke, and his uncle Tiel were all old friends, and thus he believed he was the most suitable person to bear the burden of this revenge and eliminate this danger for them. Silence fills the room as the two men exchange profound glances, while Ella stands to the side, watching them anxiously and nervously. The Duke lets out a deep sigh, his expression softening slightly, and admits that Rose had indeed grown and matured before he realized it. But he offers him sincere, fatherly advice, warning him not to shoulder all the burdens alone and reminding him that there are people who care and worry about him. Rose replies that he is well aware of this. Rose turns to Ella with a gentle smile and tells the Duke that now he too has someone he must protect. Ella is surprised by his words, which touch her heart, and her cheeks flush with shyness and happiness, while Rose looks at her with loving eyes under her father's gaze. Just then, Ella's mother, the Duchess, enters, interrupting the moment. She pushes the door open with a calm smile and asks in surprise what happened in this place. As a result of the magical battle, the room is in disarray with shattered glass and broken furniture scattered everywhere. The Duke, extremely flustered and sweating, stammers as he tries to find an excuse for the room's disastrous state to his wife. But Rose unexpectedly bows deeply in respect, offering the Duchess a profound and sincere apology, and quickly concocts an excuse to save the situation. He claims that while trying to demonstrate the progress of the martial arts the Duke had taught him, he misjudged his own strength and unintentionally overdid it. The Duchess covers her mouth with her hand, showing clear surprise at the Emperor's gesture and explanation. Rose continues to apologize, bowing with his hand on his chest, stating that he will compensate for everything that was destroyed and even offers to find rare items from abroad to make up for his transgression. The Duchess kindly approaches him, expressing surprise that he would bow in such a manner, and reminds him that she had always told him to hold his head high and never bow it. Rose raises his head and, with a calm expression, explains that he does not see it that way. He then bows his head again, admitting that he harbors true and deep remorse in his heart for having hurt their precious daughter over the years, which deeply moves Ella, who holds back her tears. The Duchess reaches out and, with motherly tenderness, caresses Rose's cheek, expressing her pure gratitude for his love and care for Ella. Rose's eyes widen in surprise and emotion at this kindness and forgiveness, while Ella stands by, watching him with a heart full of unspeakable love and overwhelming feelings. The Duke and his wife announce that they are leaving, but the Duke issues a final warning to the Emperor not to think that things are over. His wife intervenes, tells him to be quiet, and pulls him away, ending the situation. When only the two of them are left, Ella notices some dust on the Emperor's clothes and kindly reaches out to clean it for him. She asks with concern if he is all right, and he exchanges a tender look with her, smiling to reassure her that he is fine. Their private moment is suddenly interrupted by voices from behind the door. It turns out that Elvin and Bianca have been eavesdropping on everything, and Bianca announces that they also accept the Emperor's apology. Ella's brother agitatedly tries to protest, but Bianca pulls him away, insisting that the matter is settled, ending their abrupt intervention. The Emperor and Ella exchange smiles of relief and happiness, glad to have safely navigated the difficult situation. And so, they believe they have safely overcome a great obstacle, leaving the wrecked room behind them. The scene then shifts to a formal dinner, where the atmosphere is tense and silent, with the Emperor and Ella seated with the Emperor Emeritus and the Empress Dowager. The Emperor Emeritus breaks the heavy silence, pointing out that His Majesty seems to be hiding another matter from them. Hearing this direct insinuation, expressions of tension and anticipation are evident on Ella's and the Emperor's faces. The Emperor Emeritus continues his speech gravely, expressing his shock that he would hide such an important matter from them. The Empress Dowager also sighs, expressing her extreme disappointment that Ella was also involved in this concealment. The two of them, feeling deeply guilty about the accusation, hurry to apologize sincerely and remorsefully. The Emperor begins to explain, arguing that he was certain of the matter at the time, but lacked sufficient evidence. And because he was just a child then, he felt it was too early to take any action, and asserts firmly and emotionally that he was capable of handling his uncle's affair himself, pointing out that he had devoted all this time to building the necessary power to achieve that goal. The Emperor Emeritus and his wife's eyes widen at this unexpected conversation, filled with shock and confusion. The Emperor Emeritus asks, quite surprised, why the matter of his uncle, Tiel, was suddenly brought into this conversation. The Emperor and Ella are stunned by this response, their expressions freezing in utter confusion as they realize there has been a misunderstanding. The Empress Dowager explains with a sly smile that they were actually curious about something else, revealing that it concerned the Emperor and Ella's relationship, which makes Ella's face turn bright red with extreme shyness and surprise. The Empress Dowager continues, smiling, saying they had known for a long time that they were seeing each other, but their desperate attempts to hide it had only piqued their curiosity to know more. The Emperor, meanwhile, ponders the meaning of her words in confusion. The Emperor Emeritus, quite calmly, poses his question, asking about their future wedding plans, which leaves the Emperor utterly shocked. Ella is horrified, covering her flushed face in shyness at the shock of the word marriage, while the Emperor stammers, trying to process the sudden situation. The Emperor, regaining his serious expression, brings up the topic of Tiel again. When the Emperor Emeritus wonders if he was just being casual about asking for trust, Robros confirms that he is completely serious about taking on that responsibility himself. Having settled the matter, the Emperor considers this confirmation to be sufficient and satisfactory. The Emperor Emeritus then smiles calmly, acknowledging that the Emperor himself has chosen this path. The Emperor Emeritus raises his teacup, declaring his complete trust in him, and then suddenly turns to Ella. A look of relief appears on the Emperor's face, while Ella responds to the Emperor Emeritus's call, nervous and expectant. The Emperor Emeritus looks at her with a sharp, serious gaze, and then startles her with a direct and astonishing question, asking when they can expect to see grandchildren. Ella is immensely shocked, her face flushing bright red with shyness, and in her extreme dismay and confusion, she cries out for her father, while Emperor Robros's face also shows clear tension and surprise at the sudden question. The Emperor Emeritus bursts into loud, natural laughter, showing how much he is enjoying their reactions, and points out that this is precisely why talking with young people is so interesting and amusing for him. The Empress Dowager, with a calm and gentle smile, intervenes, explicitly asking her husband to stop teasing and embarrassing them like this. And so, in the warm and pleasant atmosphere that now fills the dinner table, the two realize they have indeed successfully and safely overcome that great obstacle and difficult situation.